Hello everyone, I'm the storyteller, and today I'll take you on a spooky story. But don't worry, it will be a gentle and relaxing journey before you drift off to sleep. If you're looking for a tale that's just mysterious enough and gentle enough to relax to, then you've come to the right place. Now, find yourself a comfortable space, close your eyes, and let the story begin. Story 1: The Haunted Doll That Learned to Mimic Its Owner. My name is Kelly Morgan, and I live in a small town in the state of Vermont, USA. My life used to be as quiet and ordinary as that of any other housewife, filled with daily routines of cooking, cleaning, and caring for my 6-year-old daughter, Ellie. My husband, Nathan, is a civil engineer who's often away for long stretches on distant projects. That leaves our house eerily empty at times, especially during the winter when snow falls in thick silence outside the windows and the wind howls through the cracks of the aging doors. Ellie is a smart, lively child, but she's always had a tendency to play alone. She rarely interacts with classmates and often seems irritated when someone tries to enter her imaginary world. What reassured me, at least it used to, was her love for dolls. An innocent hobby, or so I thought. It all began on a chilly October morning when I took Ellie to the local flea market. She was immediately drawn to a cluttered table full of old worn-out dolls, tangled hair, chipped eyes. But among them was one that stood out. A strange rag doll with a meticulously embroidered face, glossy black button eyes, and a blood-red stitched mouth. The vendor was an elderly woman with silvery hair and a foggy gaze, but a smile. There was something unsettling about it. "This doll's name is Marnie," she rasped. "She's very obedient, as long as your girl truly loves her." I was about to pull Ellie away, but her eyes were locked on the doll, like she was hypnotized. I sighed. "How much is it?" The woman smiled. "I don't take money, but remember, never let her near a mirror." The first week, everything seemed fine. Ellie took Marnie to bed, told her stories, even whispered into the doll's ear as if confiding in a best friend. But by the second week, things began to shift. I heard Ellie talking in her room as I stood in the hallway. Her voice was soft, broken into pauses. Then came another voice, raspy, slower, as if trying to mimic, but not quite matching. "Who are you talking to?" I asked, pushing the door open. Ellie turned to me, her face calm in a way that chilled me. "I'm teaching Marnie how to talk." I gave a nervous chuckle. "So what did Marnie say?" Ellie stared without blinking. "She can move now, Mom, and she's really good at copying my voice." That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was dead silent. At exactly 2:17 a.m., I heard whispers from Ellie's room. I crept down the hallway. The door was ajar. The nightlight cast long, twisted shadows across the wall. "Ellie, are you asleep?" I asked. No answer. I stepped in. Ellie was lying with her back to me. The doll, Marnie, was facing the wall. But what stopped me cold was the voice I'd just heard. A tiny, crackly voice, like coming from an old radio, hoarse and soft. "I love you, Mommy." I froze. That wasn't Ellie's voice. It wasn't mine. I picked Marnie up and checked her. Nothing inside. No speaker, no batteries, no circuitry. Just fabric, stuffing, and a few stitches. But that night, I swear to God, I heard a faint giggle from the toy chest as I shut the door. The next day, I decided to find out what Marnie really was. There was no information online, no history, no records. I posted in a few antique doll collector groups, and only one person responded. A man named George, a collector from Maine. George messaged me, "If that's really the doll, you need to be very careful. It was once sealed in the Appalachian Folk Museum, but went missing in 1984. Rumor has it that it learns its owner's voice, and when it gets good enough, it replaces them." I rushed to Ellie's room. She wasn't there. I ran through the house, bathroom, basement, garage. Nothing. I came back to her room again. And that's when I saw it. Marnie, sitting on the wooden chair by the window. But something was wrong. Her hair was longer. She wore a new dress, and someone had stitched a smiling mouth onto her face. The glossy black button eyes stared straight at me. I stepped back. Then from the closet came a soft rasp. "Mommy, I'm in here." It was Ellie's voice. I didn't open the closet. I ran. I called the police. They searched the house, including the closet. Just a pile of old clothes. Nothing else. Ellie returned 3 days later, sitting on the front steps like she'd never left. She said she got lost in the woods. Even though there were no tracks, no sign she ever left the house. She held Marnie like nothing had happened. When I asked about the closet, about the voice, about that night, Ellie just smiled. It wasn't me. Maybe it was her. I looked at Marnie, and I swear, just for a moment, her mouth twitched, like she was learning how to smile. Just like Ellie. I don't know when the house started to change. Maybe it was the moment Ellie brought the Marnie doll home. Maybe it was when I first heard the whispering at night. But what scared me the most was the feeling that someone else was living with us. No, something. After Ellie mysteriously returned from her 3-day disappearance, I tried everything to get her to talk about what had happened. But she only stared at me with hollow eyes and repeated one sentence over and over. "I don't remember. I only remember Marnie told me to play hide and seek." That's when strange things began happening every night. At first, it was the soft footsteps on the wooden hallway floor around 3 a.m. I assumed Ellie had woken up to use the bathroom, but when I opened her door, I always found her fast asleep, arms wrapped tightly around Marnie. One time, I decided to hide by the stairs to see for myself. And just as I feared, something was walking through the house. But what froze me in place was its small figure. It moved exactly like my daughter. Her steps, the way she tilted her head. "Ellie?" I called. No answer. The figure stopped mid-hallway, then slowly turned its head. It wasn't Ellie. It was Marnie. Not the fabric doll I remembered, but something else. A walking version with real flesh, wet hair, hanging over half its face, and lips that were moving. I lunged to turn on the light. The hallway was empty. No Ellie, no Marnie. The next day, I took Ellie to a child psychologist. She behaved oddly well, polite, responsive, even giggling and playing. When the doctor asked about Marnie, Ellie simply smiled. "Marnie doesn't like strangers, but don't worry, Mommy, she only plays with me." That night, while folding laundry in the bedroom, I heard a giggle, coming from the closet mirror. It didn't come from behind me. It came from within the mirror. I turned to look. The reflection showed me the room and Ellie playing with Marnie. But something was off. Ellie wasn't moving. Only Marnie shifted, nodded, and then licked Ellie's cheek with a long tongue. I spun around. Ellie sat there, playing with the doll, oblivious. Marnie lay still, I stepped up to the mirror. My own reflection stared back, but the eyes were empty, expressionless. Not mine. I shattered the mirror in panic. Shards flew across the floor. My chest heaved, heart pounding. And then, among the broken glass, I saw a pair of black eyes watching me. Not a reflection. Something inside the mirror. I messaged George, a collector from Maine. I told him the mirror was showing things that didn't seem real. He called immediately, voice urgent. "You still have that doll? Are you insane?" The old woman who sold it, she wasn't normal. She's one of the last mirror keepers from northern Appalachia. That doll isn't a toy. It's a mimic entity. Once it learns enough about its host, it replaces them in reality and traps their soul inside the reflection realm. I couldn't breathe. "You mean it wants to copy my daughter?" George's voice trembled. "You need to check if the child in your house is still the real Ellie." I decided to test it. That night, I placed a small recorder under Ellie's bed and a mini camera in the corner of her room. The next morning, I checked the audio. Between 2:12 and 3:04 a.m., there were faint scratching sounds from beneath the bed. Then Ellie's voice. "Marnie, don't bite me again. It hurts." Another voice replied. One that sounded like Ellie, but flat, emotionless. "You don't need feelings. Only the face. Only the voice. Only Mommy's love." The video was worse. It showed Ellie lying still, and from under the bed, a shredded fabric hand pulled out a second version of her. It crawled onto the mattress, slid under the blanket, and turned toward the camera, smiling. I almost dropped my phone. I ran to Ellie's room. She was eating breakfast like nothing had happened. But when I asked, "Ellie, do you like your pancakes with syrup or honey?" she looked up. 1 second, 2, 3. "Honey," she said, "always honey." Wrong. Ellie hated honey. She was allergic to it. My heart slammed in my chest. The child in front of me wasn't Ellie. I tried calling George again, but his line was dead. Instead, I received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside, a small dark wood framed mirror, and a note scribbled in shaky handwriting. "To know who's real, have them stand before this mirror at midnight. Soul mirrors never lie." That night, I quietly placed the mirror on the living room table. I pretended to work while Ellie drew pictures. At exactly midnight, I said, "But sweetheart, want to play a game?" Stand in front of the mirror and say, "I am Ellie Morgan," 3 times. She hesitated, then slowly walked up. At first, the reflection looked normal, until the 3rd time. "I am Ellie Morgan." The mirror cracked. Ellie's face began melting like hot wax. Black eyes appeared, endless like deep wells. Her mouth stretched far too wide. The reflection screamed and reached for the glass. Then, suddenly, the real Ellie burst out from behind the cabinet, covered in dust and scratches. "Mommy!" It locked me in the mirror. I grabbed her as the mirror trembled violently. The reflection thrashed, screaming, slamming its head against the glass, until it shattered with a screech like breaking ice. I smashed the mirror, burned Marnie, and left that house with Ellie that very night. We moved to a new town, over 300 miles from Vermont. Life slowly returned to normal. But sometimes, on moonless nights, I still catch my daughter standing quietly by the window glass, smiling for far too long. And I wonder, did I really bring back the real Ellie? Or just a smarter copy? It's been nearly 3 weeks since the night I pulled Ellie out of the soul mirror and burned the Marnie doll. 3 weeks, but I still haven't slept through a single night. We moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Albany, New York. I chose the place because it had no large mirrors, no long hallways, and neighbors just across the wall. I thought, if anything happened, at least I wouldn't face it alone. Ellie changed too. She spoke less, her eyes often glazed over, and she would jolt awake in the middle of the night, screaming nonsense like, "Don't let it crawl out. Don't let it take me back." I tried taking her to doctors, to a family therapist, even to a pastor. Everyone chalked it up to trauma from an unexplained accident. But they didn't know. No one knew that the accident was an invasion, a silent switch that only those who'd witnessed it could understand. And then it all began again. It was a weekday evening. I had just turned off the living room light when I heard small footsteps running down the hallway. Not soft, shuffling steps, but hurried ones, like someone running away. I thought Ellie had a nightmare, but when I opened her bedroom door, she was still fast asleep, and yet her feet were dirty, as if she'd run through damp soil. Tiny muddy footprints stained the bedsheet. I cleaned it silently, said nothing. But the next morning, I asked gently, "Do you remember anything from last night?" Ellie looked at me, hesitated, then softly said, "I wasn't dreaming, but someone who looked like me was sleeping inside the closet." I nailed the closet door shut, burned sage, sprinkled salt around her bed, hung a wind chime at her door. That night I stayed up until dawn, sitting in silence in the living room shadows. Around 3:27 a.m., the wind chime jingled, but there was no wind. I shot to my feet, stepped toward Ellie's room. Through the door crack, I saw another Ellie sitting on the bed, her hair tied in a ponytail. I had never tied her hair like that. She was mumbling, "Mom's asleep. Now I can play a little longer." I pushed the door open. Only the real Ellie was there, sound asleep, but the Marnie doll, supposedly reduced to ash, sat on the chair. Old black button eyes, its red-stitched mouth curled into a smug smile. I thought I was losing my mind. I went back to the old soul mirror, even though it was shattered. The small shard I had kept, like a grim reminder, began to dim every time I held it. It no longer reflected anything, just a dark, warm surface, like it was breathing. I contacted George again. This time, his voice was grave, like a man confessing before his final breath. "Our replacement doesn't just copy appearances, Kelly. It learns to become a better version of the person it replaces." I went numb. George continued, "If a part of her soul is still trapped inside the mirror, you need to find the reverser. They live in a town called Dunbridge, west of Pennsylvania. They're the only ones who know how to separate the original soul from the imposter." I froze. That meant Ellie might still be trapped somewhere, even while her body stood in front of me. I packed our things, left a short note for the neighbors, loaded Ellie into the car, and drove west. The trip took nearly 8 hours. The whole way, Ellie, or whatever was sitting in the back seat, didn't sleep, didn't speak, just stared out the window. At one point, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her, staring back at me, expressionless, unblinking. That thing was learning, waiting. Dunbridge was a fog-covered town, nearly forgotten by time. Crumbling houses, shuttered shops. I followed George's directions to an old clock shop. Inside was a gaunt man with long white hair, wearing brown leather gloves and a dark red scarf. "Are you the reverser?" I asked. He nodded. "I need to save my daughter. She's been replaced." He asked nothing more, just handed me a small pendulum clock and said, "When the hand strikes 000, place the child between two mirrors. One whole, one broken. If you're brave, look into both. The real one will blink. The replacement will not." I followed his instructions. At midnight, in a cheap roadside motel, I carried Ellie into the bathroom. One full mirror across from a cracked shard. I positioned her between them. The clock ticked. Midnight. I looked into Ellie's eyes in the left mirror, then the right. Neither blinked. Despair clawed at me. But then, in the broken shard, I saw another Ellie, face smudged with dirt, hand pressed against the glass, silently mouthing, "Mommy, help me." I smashed the mirror. Screams erupted from both sides. The room went dark. A wind surged in, as if someone had opened a door between worlds, and then I collapsed. Dead doll, that learned to mimic its owner. When I came to, Ellie was hugging me, her eyes full of tears, voice trembling. "Mom, this time it's really me. I remember the bracelet you wore on my birthday last year. I remember you said you hated that cartoon with the talking mouse." I held her tight, but from the floor, in a single leftover shard of glass, a pair of eyes stared back, smiling, waiting. Story 2. Bloodstained Restaurant. That evening, a group of friends decided to enjoy dinner at a famous restaurant in the city. The restaurant, named l'Odyssée, had been passed around in high society as a must-visit destination. With its ancient architecture and luxurious decor, l'Odyssée gave the feeling of stepping into another world, where the parties never end and the dishes are always prepared meticulously and perfectly. My 4 friends, Jason, Mary, Eric, and Lily, had all heard strange stories about this place. Although we were somewhat hesitant, our curiosity and the desire to experience a lavish dinner led us to decide to give it a try. As we passed through the restaurant's main door, I felt a shiver rise within me. It wasn't because of the opulence or the dim lighting, but because of a strange feeling as if something was wrong. The enormous chandeliers emitted an unusually faint light, almost as if concealing a secret that we couldn't understand. However, we quickly forgot that feeling when we were led to our table. The waiter, a tall man with a cold expression, guided us to our seats. He didn't say a word, simply pointing to our places. 4 chairs were arranged around a round table, covered with a pristine white cloth, with elegant glass glasses and a set of carefully arranged knives and forks. Everything seemed to be meticulously calculated down to the smallest detail. As we sat down, the waiter quietly left, and a few minutes later, an older man with white hair appeared before us. "Welcome to l'Odyssée," he said in a deep, warm voice, but with an unsettling undertone. "I am Victor, the owner of this place. Tonight, you will experience a unique dinner, a journey through a world of dishes unlike any other." We smiled and greeted him back, though I could sense an inexplicable tension in the air. While everyone else started talking about the dishes, I couldn't take my eyes off Victor. There was something in his gaze that made me feel uneasy, but I just assumed it was an unexplainable feeling. Because who wouldn't feel a bit strange entering such a luxurious restaurant for the first time? The meal began, and each dish was brought to the table. The appetizer was a plate of grilled scallops, served with a strange sauce. The first sensation when eating it was a mild numbness, like when you eat something cold that makes your tongue feel tingly. Jason was the first to comment on the dish, exclaiming, "This feels strange, don't you think? It's like I'm losing feeling in my tongue." We all laughed, but as I looked at the dish on my plate, I too felt uneasy. The scallops looked like they had been prepared from some creature I had never seen before. They had a color that was unlike regular scallops, shiny, and with a strange beauty that didn't quite resemble natural food. The main course was a piece of ground beef, but not in the usual manner. The outer layer of the meat was so soft it seemed as if there was nothing to cut. When the meat touched my tongue, I could clearly feel a change in my body. The numbness spread from my tongue to my throat and then down to my chest. Each breath became more difficult, but I couldn't stop eating, as if some invisible force was making me continue. Eric and Mary seemed oblivious, continuing to eat and chat happily, but Jason and I had started to feel that something was wrong. Jason stood up trying to move, but his body seemed trapped, unable to budge. "Maybe I ate something strange," Jason said, but his voice was weak, as if he was speaking from a distant place. We looked at each other, realizing that something incredibly dangerous was happening. I glanced around, but no one in the restaurant seemed to notice our change. Everyone was still sitting, enjoying their meal, completely unaware that they too were being watched and manipulated, just like us. Victor stood silently in the corner of the room, his eyes seemingly following our every movement. I couldn't suppress the fear anymore. A wave of panic surged within me. We weren't just eating a normal dinner. We were partaking in a game, a deadly game that we hadn't even realized. As I tried to stand up, I felt that I couldn't breathe. My body was frozen, completely paralyzed, yet I could still clearly perceive what was happening around me. We were trapped in a snare, and there was no way out. "Don't worry," Victor's voice echoed from a distance, sounding like a warning. "You'll understand soon. Each dish is one step closer to the end for you." At that moment, I realized that we were facing a terrifying truth, one far worse than anything we could have imagined. Everything that was happening in the restaurant felt like a nightmare I couldn't escape from. The sense of paralysis didn't just overwhelm my body, it also spread into my mind. I tried to open my mouth to speak to Jason, but all I could produce were weak sounds, as though every part of my body was refusing to function. Meanwhile, the other guests continued to eat and drink joyfully, seemingly unaware of what was happening. I looked over at Eric and Mary. Eric didn't seem any different. He was even laughing and chatting with Mary. But on Mary's face, I saw a subtle change. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and her hand trembled as she brought the fork to her mouth. Surely she could feel something was wrong, but maybe not strongly enough to realize the danger lurking. Victor, the owner of the restaurant, still stood in a distant corner, watching us as if he were waiting for some reaction. His eyes gleamed under the yellow lights, and the smile on his face only made him more terrifying. A smile I couldn't understand, as if he saw us as mere pawns in a game with no escape. "Don't panic," Victor said, walking over with a calm expression. "Everything will end soon." I couldn't control my body, but I couldn't let myself be swept away by panic either. Trying to focus, I looked around. Suddenly, a strange image appeared before my eyes. The paintings on the wall, which had once been elegant landscapes, now became grotesque. The images of majestic wild animals in the paintings suddenly transformed into monstrous creatures with fiery eyes and gaping mouths, as though they were peering into my soul. At that moment, I realized that everything in this restaurant had a purpose. Every detail, from the lighting to the sounds, could be part of Victor's plan. It wasn't just us. Every guest who was enjoying their meal was a victim in a game, and this time, they were the fish in the net. A strange sound broke my thoughts. Jason, my close friend, collapsed to the floor. We stared at him in shock, and I saw his body convulsing violently, his eyes wide open, as if he were witnessing something horrible. The paralysis had worsened. Not only was it physical numbness, but also a loss of control over everything in my body. Eric screamed in panic, but when I looked into his eyes, I saw an intense fear. Not because of the paralysis we were suffering, but because of what he was seeing. "Lily, do you see it?" Eric yelled, but I couldn't speak. With each passing second, the feeling of fear grew stronger, and I saw the paintings on the wall suddenly move, as though the animals in the paintings were stepping out. Victor moved closer to us. His gaze was cold, emotionless. "This is my experiment," he said. "Each of you has been chosen. You will be a part of L'Odyssey's history." I didn't understand what he was saying, but a sense of horror rose in my chest. Then, as Victor turned away, something strange happened. One of the paintings on the wall suddenly shattered. Sharp glass shards fell to the floor, and from behind the painting, a dark passage opened up. The passage was devoid of light, only a pitch-black space where we could see nothing. Mary, who had stopped trembling by now, stood up and pulled me away from my seat. "Lily, we have to leave now," she said in panic. The paralysis seemed to have lessened slightly, but my body was still weak. I looked back one more time, and now I understood. It wasn't just us being manipulated, but perhaps everyone in the restaurant was a prey in a meticulously planned scheme. Those ordinary diners weren't innocent victims. They were the ones chosen, just like us. Mary and I began to move toward the dark passage, even though I felt so frightened I could barely move. But we had no other choice. Suddenly, a sound rang out, like a mocking laugh from Victor. "You can't escape," he called from afar. "Every path you take leads to the same end." We stepped into the pitch-black passage, not knowing what awaited us. But I felt one thing very clearly. I was no longer just a regular partygoer. I had stepped into a game with no way back. The dark passage stretched on endlessly, like an invisible corridor leading me into an inescapable nightmare. I could feel each heavy step beneath my feet, each one pulling me deeper into this cold silence. Mary walked ahead of me, no longer as calm as before. Neither of us could see anything beyond the all-encompassing darkness, only the sound of our footsteps echoing through the still air, bouncing off the invisible walls. "We can't keep going like this," Mary gasped, trying to grasp my hand. "Something's definitely wrong. I can't feel my hand anymore." Her words snapped me to attention. Although my body still felt numb, I realized that this wasn't just a coincidence. I turned to look at the darkness behind us, but all I saw was a vast pitch-black void. The passage was so long that I couldn't see the end, and a rising fear began to swell inside me. We couldn't just keep walking like this. We needed to understand what was happening. We had to find a way out. "We have to turn back," I whispered, but my voice was weak, as though it was being strangled in my throat. Mary looked at me, and in her eyes I saw a flicker of worry. She nodded, but when we turned around, everything changed. The passage suddenly seemed wider, and the walls around us began to blur, becoming hazy, as if we were in a dream. Everything around us seemed to warp, shifting in a strange way. The space felt distorted, and suddenly, a door appeared before us. The door was made of wood, ethereal and adorned with intricate carvings, standing as if it were an escape. But something inside me made it feel impossible to pass through. An invisible pull, like a cold gust of wind, blew from behind the door, making me feel an indescribable fear. But Mary didn't hesitate. She walked straight toward the door without questioning me. "We have to keep going, Lily," Mary said, her voice firm, but still with a slight tremor. I couldn't stop her. I followed Mary, though the feeling of unease clung to me. When the door opened, an entirely different space appeared before our eyes. This wasn't an ordinary room. I saw long tables set up in a strange way, with food that had long been discarded, plates of food emitting a foul smell, and chairs around them with no one sitting. The air in the room was a mix of mildew and the smell of burnt meat. "Mary, where is this?" I asked, but my question sounded weak, as though the truth was already too clear. Mary didn't answer. She looked around, and suddenly, a noise came from the darkness behind us. A faint laugh, a laugh I immediately recognized. It was Victor's, but this time, his laugh wasn't calm. It was eerie, as though something very sinister was drawing near. "Welcome to the party," a cold voice rang out, and I realized Victor was standing in a hidden corner of the room. "We always welcome guests like you. You'll be a part of the story of l'Odyssey." I felt an uncontrollable fear grip me. My body trembled, and I felt a chill rising from within, spreading throughout me. Everything in the room was strange and terrifying. The food on the tables wasn't ordinary. It was bizarre, things I'd never seen before. The stench made me want to vomit, but I couldn't leave, as though an invisible force was holding us there. Victor stepped out from the shadows, smiling as though he had been waiting for us. "Every part of this feast is one step closer to the end," he said, his voice soft but full of danger. "You can't escape. You will be part of l'Odyssey, and you will understand its mystery." Mary suddenly turned to me, her eyes wide, staring at me as though she had realized something horrifying. "Lily, what are we supposed to do? I can't take it anymore." I looked at her, my legs weakening. I couldn't speak. I could only stand there, staring into her eyes, and into the cruel expression on Victor's face. We were trapped in a game with no way out, and with every passing second, I felt the fear rising within me. The strange food, the warped walls, and Victor's never-ending laughter had all bound us together in a brutal game that we couldn't escape. "It's time for you to start understanding," Victor said with a chilling smile. "You will be the main characters in this story, and when it's over, you'll understand that you're not the victims. You are part of l'Odyssey." A feeling of paralysis overtook my body once again. Unable to move, unable to speak, I could only hear Victor's laughter echoing in the stillness, and inside me, the fear had turned into despair. We had fallen into a world with no escape, where death was inevitable, but fear was the only thing left, and I knew we couldn't stop. We couldn't turn back. L'Odyssey had chosen us, and the story had begun. Story 3: Cannibal Feast. That day, my group of 7 friends gathered at a famous restaurant on the outskirts of the city. This restaurant was known for its luxury and especially for its unique, rare dishes. We, the close-knit friends from college, hadn't had a chance to meet up in a long time. So this party had been planned for a while, and everything had been carefully organized. The excitement and anticipation filled the air in the car I was in, the sparkling city lights reflecting through the window. But little did I know that would be the last time I would see that light. The restaurant seemed out of place compared to what I had imagined for a fun party. It was built in a quiet area, completely separated from the noisy streets of the city. A grand old villa with dark tinted windows and crooked walls made me feel as though I was stepping into another world. The smell of the place, unlike any restaurant I had ever been to, was particularly unsettling. It was sweet, yet there was something ominous about it, like the scent of old candles burning in a room that had been forgotten for a long time. We were led into the main dining room, a large space adorned with ancient paintings, dim lighting, and soft music. The long dining table was covered with a pristine white tablecloth where strange dishes were laid out. From blackened grilled beef to steamed chicken, everything looked very tempting. Everything seemed normal until I felt something was off. Right after sitting down, a strange drowsiness overtook me. An unexplained fatigue washed over me, and when I looked at my friends, they seemed to be feeling the same. Everyone ate happily, chatting away, but none of us noticed anything unusual until everything started to blur. I just had time to realize that there was something strange in my food, a sudden dizziness that spread throughout my body. My vision became blurry, and shortly after, I fell into a faint, unaware of anything else. When I woke up, I felt cold and aching. My eyes opened, and I realized I wasn't sitting in the dining room anymore. Instead, I was trapped in a damp cellar, devoid of any light. The room was pitch dark, with no windows, only the faint sound of water dripping somewhere, echoing in the space. My friends, who had been eating with me, were now lying unconscious, barely able to move. I tried to stand, but my head felt heavy, and my body seemed drained of all strength. "What's happening?" I whispered in panic. A voice from one of my friends, Jack, echoed from the dark corner. "You're awake?" "I don't know. Where have they taken us?" His voice trembled, but I could feel the fear in it. We struggled to sit up, feeling like we were sinking into an endless nightmare. One by one, everyone woke up, each person confused and disoriented. We tried to search for light, but the cellar remained completely dark. Then I realized not all of us were in this cellar. One friend, Jane, was missing. "Where's Jane?" I asked, trying to look behind me. Suddenly, a cold, eerie laugh rang out from a corner of the room, startling us. The laugh sounded strange, as if someone was toying with our fear. And then, a shadowy figure emerged from the darkness, stepping forward with an eerie, undefined presence. She wore a long dress, and her long black hair covered her face. Her steps were soft, but they echoed like the footsteps of someone who hadn't walked for a long time. She stopped in front of us and smiled. But that smile was not the smile of an ordinary person. Her eyes glowed brightly in the dark, making me feel like I was staring into a deep, haunting abyss. Welcome to the feast, she said, her voice echoing in the empty space. We couldn't respond. The atmosphere became heavier, and I could feel the presence of something ominous, something terrifying, surrounding us. Then I realized what made me shudder. The smell of the food from the feast. The smell of meat, the smell of decay. Not just the smell of cooked meat, but the smell of death. Something in me recoiled. We were trapped in a trap, and there was no way to escape. What are you doing to us? I managed to ask, but my throat felt tight. It's time for you to understand, she replied, her voice carrying an odd, eerie tone. This feast is not an ordinary feast. You will taste a dish you will never forget. I couldn't believe my ears. I looked around, seeing my friends, all of them pale, trying to force a smile, but it was clear they didn't understand what was happening. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise from the corner of the cellar. An image flashed in my mind. A thought briefly crossed my mind. The food from the feast. What did we eat? Then I saw a large table in the corner of the room, covered with a white cloth. On it, pieces of fresh red meat, dishes that looked like ordinary meals, but to my eyes, they looked like dishes from hell. We were stuck in this nightmare, and everything, including our lives, was being controlled by a force we had yet to understand. The story of the human flesh feast had officially begun. When the strange figure of the woman in the long dress vanished into the darkness, we were left with a heavy silence, as if the air itself had stopped breathing. The basement was pitch black, cold. Every smallest sound echoed, creating eerie noises like the sighs of the darkness. We sat still, our eyes focused on the table in the corner of the room, where disgusting dishes were waiting. I wanted to ask more about that woman, to understand why we had ended up in this situation. But the suffocating feeling from the first wave of dizziness had not yet left me. Everything felt hazy, as though I was still trapped in a terrible dream I couldn't wake up from. And then, another sound broke the silence. This time, it was the sound of a cup shattering in the dark corner, followed by footsteps. We all looked up, exchanging confused glances. What was happening? Why were there these sounds? Before we could react, the woman appeared again. This time, there was no haunting smile, only a terrifying silence. She stood there, just a few steps away from us, holding a large tray. On the tray were dishes I couldn't recognize. There was a strange smell, a mixture of rot and raw meat. "Your food is ready," she said, her voice flat like a machine. "Enjoy, and you will understand." We all, each in our own way, couldn't bring ourselves to look at the food. My hands trembled as I looked at the tray filled with meat. A strange feeling overtook me, a feeling that was both familiar and repulsive. Suddenly, I remembered the dinner before we were brought here. I recalled the taste of the food, a sweet, strange flavor. I also remembered the drowsiness after eating. But why did it feel like we had eaten something that wasn't ordinary meat? A scream suddenly pierced the silence. That's when I realized it was Jack. He was pointing at the meat on the tray, his face pale, mouth moving as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. Don't eat," Jack said, his voice trembling. That's human meat." Everyone went silent. No one spoke. I looked at the food on the tray, and a cold chill ran down my spine, rendering me immobile. How did he know? How could he be so sure? "Yes, you've already eaten it," the woman spoke again. And this time, I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. The meat of those who were less fortunate than you. Those who became food for those with money. It is the finest dish we have. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could hardly breathe. It felt like my entire body was being squeezed by an invisible hand. Human meat. We had eaten human meat. But don't worry, the woman continued. Once you finish eating, you will become a part of the feast forever. This meal will make you a part of our family. I felt cornered, surrounded by the terrifying laughter echoing from the darkness. Everything seemed to collapse around me. I turned to my friends. They looked at each other, each one with terror in their eyes. But no one dared to speak. They must have thought like I did, that this wasn't a joke, but a real nightmare. A deadly game we couldn't escape from. What should we do? Sarah, one of my friends, said in a hoarse voice. She had tried to stand up, but her legs still seemed powerless. We could only look at each other in confusion. I had the feeling that we were being watched. Invisible eyes sneaking peeks at us from the darkness. Fear surged like a wave inside me. We didn't know what would happen to us if we stayed here any longer. Surely it wasn't going to end well. A sudden rustling sound broke my thoughts. I turned around, and from the darkness, another figure appeared. This time, it was a tall man, his face expressionless. He stood there, staring at us with a cold gaze, as though we were just prey he was waiting for. It's time to end the game, he said, his voice deep and muffled. We looked at each other, and no one dared to speak again. Everyone knew we didn't have much time left. Death wasn't the only thing we had to face, but something even more terrifying. A transformation that we couldn't even begin to imagine. We knew we were trapped in a game with no way out. The food, the haunting words of the woman, and the appearance of the strange man. All of these pieces formed a terrifying picture I couldn't undo. And now, there was only one thing for certain. We had to find a way out of here before it was too late. We sat in silence in the basement, our eyes fixed on the tall man who had just appeared. Each of his footsteps rang out like the sound of a death bell in the heavy silence of the space. At that moment, I felt my body drained of all energy, each breath coming harder and more labored. The cold from this place wasn't the cold of the air, but a cold that came from the very depths of the fear rising in my chest. We don't have much time, the man said, his eyes so cold that I felt as if I were looking into an endless abyss. He stepped closer to us, each stride powerful, yet unhurried. It was as if he knew we couldn't escape, that we couldn't do anything to change the situation. I glanced at Jack, and he looked back at me with eyes full of worry. We both realized one thing. We weren't just facing death, but what would happen after. That death wouldn't be an end, but a brutal process that we couldn't fully understand yet. "We're not your food," Sarah finally spoke. But her voice wasn't strong enough to convince herself, let alone the man. "Haha." He chuckled dryly, the sound harsh. "You don't understand. You've already eaten your meal. You chose to join this feast, and no one can back out now." The sensation of suffocation overwhelmed me. His words struck deep into my heart like knives, and we truly had no way out. Suddenly, I heard a faint noise behind me. One of the small basement windows had been opened, and a cold draft blew in, bringing with it a sense of being trapped in a cage. I turned around and realized that this window wasn't a normal one. It was a small window, near the floor, looking out into a long, dark corridor, where no one was in sight. That's the exit, I thought to myself. It felt like a glimmer of hope in this dark night. But could we escape before it was too late? "We have to go," I yelled. I was no longer afraid, but desperate. Everyone in the group looked at each other, but no one could make a decision. The fear had paralyzed us, and we couldn't act. Then, something unexpected happened. The large wooden door we had been trapped behind suddenly burst open with a loud creak. A group of people dressed in black appeared, stepping into the basement, their faces obscured by masks. They didn't speak. They simply moved silently toward us. "Follow us," one of them said in a monotone voice devoid of emotion. We had no other choice. We stood up trying to follow them, but my legs felt like they were about to give way. It was as though my body had no strength left, as if a part of me had already died. We were led down a long, dark corridor, each footstep echoing through the narrow space, heavy. The door behind me slowly closed, and we couldn't go back. Finally, we were taken to another room, smaller than the last, but the lighting here was different from the others. The white light from neon bulbs dimly illuminated the room, making the space feel even more terrifying. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, making me wrinkle my nose and try to endure it. In this room, I saw a large table with surgical tools, knives, and some instruments I couldn't recognize. Under the dim light, everything seemed to be oozing blood, dark red stains on the tools, and the metallic smell of blood rising. "You will become part of this game," the tall man, who had been silent all this time, said with his cold, merciless gaze. He looked into our eyes, brutally. A scream rang out, and I turned to look at Jack. He had collapsed on the floor. Blood was pouring from his mouth, not from any wound, but as if something was draining him dry. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I rushed to Jack's side, but it was too late. He wasn't moving anymore. "Jack!" I screamed, but no one answered. The others looked at each other with fear in their eyes. No one dared to approach the surgical table, but it seemed that the evil of this place was slowly drawing us closer. The men in black continued to move around us, and the air grew heavier. It seemed we couldn't escape this cycle. With every passing minute, everything grew more hopeless. Suddenly, one of us, Sarah, stood up, her voice firm. "We can't let ourselves become the next prey." She charged toward the door, but immediately, a noise came from behind. A strong arm grabbed her and pulled her back. I didn't see who did it, but I was certain that we had no more chance to escape. The doors were sealed shut, the darkness thickened, and strange sounds began to surround us. It was too late to regret. Our footsteps echoed through the dark hallway, each step seeming to push us closer to death, to an end none of us could have ever imagined. The group was herded into a secret room, the smell of bleach and blood mixing with the air, making me feel as if my very soul was being cleansed. When the door slammed shut with a loud noise, I felt the space around me contract. The flickering neon lights in the room made everything seem hazy, and all I could hear was the rapid sound of my own breath merging with the noises leaking from the medical instruments. Large surgical tables filled the room with forceps, knives, scissors, drills, all stained with blood or coated in strange black ink. But that wasn't the only thing that made me shudder. On the large table in the center of the room was a corpse. No, it wasn't just any corpse, but one that was perfectly intact. Its skin pale white, eyes shut tight. The corpse seemed soulless, lifeless, but something inside me made it impossible to look away. I suddenly realized that it was one of the people who had attended our feast. "Don't look at it!" a voice suddenly rang out, startling me. I turned around and saw the strange woman who had led us into this room, standing right behind me, nearly silent. Her long hair curled like black threads, covering part of her face. "That body's part of the game. You'll understand soon." I didn't understand, and I didn't want to. Every part of me was drenched in sweat. But a part of me began to realize that we were being cornered, trapped, with no way out. The food we'd eaten earlier, the threatening words of the woman, and the scenes around me made me feel as if we were walking into an endless nightmare with no escape. One of the group, Daniel, suddenly collapsed, clutching his head. "No, no way," he mumbled, his voice weary, as if he was suffering excruciating pain. "What do we do now? We ate human flesh. We're going to become them." Daniel's words rang out like a haunting reminder, sending chills down everyone's spine. The feeling was not just a statement, but a warning of survival. They had eaten human flesh, and now they were being dragged into a deadly game with no way out. "That's right," the woman continued, her voice void of any compassion. "You ate human flesh, and now you'll be part of the game. You'll go through everything they went through." I couldn't listen anymore. I looked around, searching for an escape, but every door was tightly shut. We were trapped here, and the more I tried to escape, the more I felt the noose of death tightening around my neck. At that moment, one of the group, Lily, suddenly stood up. "We can't let it end like this," she said, her eyes shining with determination. "We have to fight back." Lily was always the strongest among us, but when she said these words, I could feel the fear in her voice. Her strength couldn't hide the desperation rising inside her. She wasn't a warrior. She was just an ordinary person like the rest of us. But in this moment, she did what no one else in the group dared to do. She stood up and faced death. "We have to find a way to escape," she continued, her gaze no longer panicked but filled with resolve. "We can't let ourselves become part of this damn game." But how could we escape? This room had no windows. Every exit was blocked. The dark hallway led only to an uncertain future. And there was something else. The body on the operating table. It seemed like a warning. Could we escape? Or would we become the next prey in this game? Lily began walking toward the table in the center of the room, where the body lay. Everyone in the group followed her with their eyes. No one said a word, but we all could feel the danger we were facing. Lily touched the table, then turned back to look at us, her face pale, but her eyes were determined. "There's only one way," she said, her voice low. "We have to learn what's going on here. We need to find out about these people and the secrets of this place." I looked at her face, seeing the determination, but I knew it was a determination full of risk. We couldn't defeat them. We couldn't escape from here unless we knew exactly what we were up against. "But what will we have to do?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "If we do nothing, we'll become them, right?" Lily didn't answer immediately. She turned back to look at the body, then back at us. We have to learn about what happened before we were brought here, she said. Only by knowing that can we think of a way to escape. The group fell silent. No one dared to speak. Dark thoughts swirled in my head. We were trapped in a game with no way out, and no one could save us but ourselves. Yet, I couldn't give up. I couldn't let death take away everything we had once had. I looked into the dim light, hearing my own labored breath. With each passing second, the feeling of hopelessness grew stronger. Could we survive? Or would we ultimately become a part of this bloody feast? I couldn't shake the image of the corpse we had just seen. It was burned into my mind like a horrifying warning. At first, I thought the body was just part of a scare tactic, a way to make us feel more frightened. But when Lily stood up, full of determination, and said that we had to find out what had happened, before we were captured, I realized that we were facing something far more dangerous than any nightmare. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice full of despair. Her eyes couldn't leave the cold body on the table. Lily looked around, her eyes flashing with a faint spark, as if she had found a clue. "We need to go into the room next door, where there might be documents or traces about these people." No one spoke, but the look in everyone's eyes reflected agreement. We all realized that there was only one way to survive: to learn about the people holding us captive and to uncover the secrets they were hiding. But how could we step outside when every door was locked tight, and every step we took brought us closer to danger? The room we were standing in now looked like an old laboratory with medical tools scattered everywhere. The image of the body was still vivid in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling of nausea in my stomach. Could we escape this place without becoming the next meal? Lily walked toward the table with the body, where a chilling and haunting atmosphere hung in the air. She leaned over to look at the glass cabinets around the table, which were filled with surgical instruments and strange materials. A sense of unease spread through me as I looked at these tools. Things that used to reassure me when going for medical checkups now turned into instruments of death. "We need to find something, a record, a document," Lily whispered, her hand feeling along the surface of the table. "Anything that could help us understand why we're here." Suddenly, a faint noise broke the silence. From the back of the room, a small door creaked open and a figure stepped in. We didn't have time to react. Everything happened too quickly. The person wore a mask and held a dim oil lamp, the flickering light making the air in the room more eerie than ever. The figure stood silently, just staring at us, not saying a word. We didn't dare move, didn't dare speak. Everything seemed frozen in time. Then the person spoke. "Are you ready to know the truth?" His voice was deep, full of menace, but there was also something sinister about it, as if he was waiting for something from us. We didn't know what to do, but Lily was the first to speak up. "We're not afraid of you," Lily said, her voice not very certain, but still trying to stay calm. "We just want to know what's happening here. Why were we brought here?" The masked man chuckled softly, but the smile didn't bring any comfort. "Do you think you're the victims in this game? You're just pawns in a larger game. You will never know all the things we're doing here." A sense of horror welled up inside me, as though I had been thrown into a pit with no way out. The look in that man's eyes held no sympathy or fear. It was as though he was striking at our last ounce of resilience, making us feel powerless. Don't let yourselves be fooled, the man continued, his tone slow like a warning. The feast you're participating in is no joke. You won't just be food, you'll become a part of us. This meal is an exchange. Do you understand that? I swallowed hard, the suffocating feeling closing in on me. His words not only terrified me, but made me feel like we had fallen into a trap with no escape. But then, a thought flickered in my mind. If we were truly the prey in this game, could we turn it into our own game? We won't become prey in this game, Lily said, her gaze determined. We will find a way out. Really? The man laughed, the sound like metal scraping together. Are you sure? You'll never leave here safely. You can only choose how you live or die. Those words felt like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I looked around, seeing the confusion in the eyes of my friends, but the determination in Lily's eyes gave me a flicker of hope. If she could do it, maybe we could too. This won't end easily, the man said, but if you want to know the truth, I'll give you a chance. Suddenly, he pulled an old map from his coat, rolled it up, and threw it toward Lily. Use it, but don't forget, everything comes with a price. Lily took the map, her gaze harder than ever. The map, though unclear, seemed like a path that would lead us to the answers we needed. But could we survive the challenges it would bring? We had no time to think more. The door behind us opened, and we knew that this terrifying journey had only just begun. The old map that the man in the mask had thrown to Lily still lay firmly in her hand, like a promise of one last chance, or perhaps a deadly trap. But at this point, we had no choice but to move forward, following the trail that the map guided us on. The door behind us closed with a click, the sound of the lock clicking shut like a warning. There was no turning back. The faint light from the neon bulbs flickered overhead, casting a dreamlike atmosphere over the space. The group stepped out of the room and into a narrow, long corridor devoid of any sign of life. The only sound was the echo of our footsteps, reverberating in the silent space like a death knell. The weight of exhaustion stretched throughout our journey, but none of us dared to stop. Each step felt like a struggle for survival, a battle not just against time, but against the fear that was slowly overtaking each of our hearts. It felt as though we were walking deeper into our own darkness, into a place where no one could predict where it would lead. Lily picked up the map and tried to study it, her eyes scanning the faded symbols on the paper. We need to go through the next door, she whispered. It's at the end of this hallway. The next door Lily pointed to looked old and rusty, showing no signs of life. But what unsettled me the most were the markings on the wall surrounding the door. There were carvings, symbols I couldn't understand. The lines seemed hastily drawn, as if someone had frantically scratched them into the wall in a panic. And this only made me feel that something terrible awaited us behind that door. Lily didn't say anything. She simply moved forward and opened the door. The sound of the hinges screeched loudly, as if signaling that everything would collapse right after. The door creaked open, and we stepped into another room. But it wasn't a normal room. It was a laboratory. Medical equipment was neatly arranged, but all of it was covered in thick dust, as if it had been abandoned for a long time. The strong smell of disinfectant filled the air, making it hard to breathe. The map led us to a large table in the corner of the room. On it were old documents, yellowed pages that seemed to have been written a long time ago. Lily walked up and began flipping through the pages. We all gathered around her, silent. Each page she turned felt darker, as though we were uncovering an unbearable secret. "Here," Lily said softly. Her voice choked. She picked up an old photograph, and the way she looked at it made a surge of fear rise in my chest. It was a black and white photo, aged, showing a group of people standing in a room that resembled the one we were in. The people in the photo all had strange appearances, their eyes vacant, as if they were no longer human. But what sent a chill down my spine was the appearance of a person I recognized. The woman in the long dress we had encountered earlier. "What is this?" Jack, my friend, asked, his voice hoarse. "This is the woman we met before," Lily said, her eyes still glued to the photograph. "But this can't be right. We're seeing what they did a long time ago." Suddenly, a noise echoed, making the entire group jump. From the hallway outside, we heard the sound of footsteps, soft yet clear. Something was approaching. The group went silent, our eyes filled with panic. We couldn't be caught here, but we couldn't retreat either. This room, with its documents and photographs, was the only clue we had to understand what was happening. "We have to go," Lily said quickly, tearing the photograph from the document and tucking it into her pocket. "We can't let them know we know." But before we could move, the door to the room suddenly swung open. A man stepped inside, but this time, he was different from the others we had encountered. He wasn't wearing a mask, and his face was covered in a beard, his rugged features illuminated by his bright eyes. His gaze made me feel like I was being pulled into an abyss, as if he could see through every secret we had. "Where are you going?" he asked, his voice low but laced with mockery. "What are you searching for?" We didn't have time to answer. And just as he stepped in, another group of people appeared behind him. All the exits were blocked. At that moment, I felt despair creeping into every fiber of my being. What had we done wrong? Why were we being pushed into this situation? Every path led to death, and I couldn't understand if we still had any chance of surviving. The man looked at us, his gaze cold, as if there was no trace of emotion. "Don't worry, you won't have to leave just yet," he said, his lips pressed tight. "But you need to understand one thing. What you're doing is only making us enjoy this more." Then he raised his hand, and a series of noises echoed. The doors began closing around us. The space grew more suffocating, and I felt like I was being swallowed by an endless nightmare. Story 4: Haunted Park. That year, at the end of summer, a group of young friends from a university in California decided to embark on a daring adventure one July night. They were adventure lovers, often seeking out mysterious places, and there was almost nothing that could scare them. Among the group were Ethan, Sarah, James, and a girl named Lily, who always seemed confident and enjoyed challenging the strange. They had all heard rumors about an abandoned park deep in the forest outside the city, a place where no one dared to enter after dark. Some local gossip claimed that the park underwent a change at night, but no one really understood what the truth behind that was. So, on a moonless night, the group decided to drive to the park. Their goal was simple: to prove that it was all just wild stories and nothing to be afraid of. They thought that nothing could make them fear the darkness. After passing through a few bumpy roads, Their car came to a stop in front of the park's gate. The main gate was rusty and seemed like it hadn't been cared for in a long time. But when Sarah opened the car door, a cold breeze rushed in, making her shiver. "There's definitely nothing here," Sarah laughed, but her eyes seemed not to fully believe her own words. The group walked through the gate and began to enter the park. The surroundings looked desolate. Tall, dense trees towered over them, as if trying to obscure everything from the light. The paths were overgrown with weeds and decaying leaves, making the air feel thick and heavy. "There's definitely something wrong," Lily said, stopping and looking around. A heavy feeling had settled over them as soon as they stepped in. Fireflies hovered in the air, casting eerie shadows, but what unsettled them most was the silence. No buzzing insects, no rustling wind, no birds. It was all frighteningly silent. As they continued, suddenly the lights in the park flickered out. Everything was plunged into complete darkness. They stopped, and in that moment, Ethan tried to turn on his phone's flashlight, but the screen only flickered briefly before shutting off again. "This can't be happening," James said, his voice tense. "My phone is doing the same." A cold gust of wind blew through from an unknown direction, making them shiver. Suddenly, they noticed something strange. The gate they had just passed through was gone. Not locked, but completely vanished. In its place was a tall wall surrounding the entire park, blocking their way back. We're trapped," Lily said, her voice trembling. "Does anyone see anything?" A faint footstep echoed from behind them, making everyone turn around. It was the sound of footsteps, but there was no one there. The group froze, a sense of dread rising within them. "We have to find a way out," Ethan said. But as he looked around, he realized that escaping wouldn't be as easy as they had thought. Everything in this park seemed to have changed. As they ventured deeper into the park, whispers could be heard from afar, as if people were speaking under the thick fog. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, as though someone was watching them, waiting for something. "We really should turn back," James said, panic evident in his voice. "Something is definitely wrong." But when the group turned back, they saw nothing but a solid wall blocking their way with no escape. "Don't worry," Ethan tried to stay calm. "We have to find another way." The deeper they went, the heavier the atmosphere around them felt. Shadows began to appear before them. A figure flitted just ahead, causing Sarah to scream. "There's someone," she said, but when the flashlight illuminated the spot, there was only a shadow, like a ghost darting past. They continued walking, realizing that this park was no ordinary place. The deeper they went, the more the trees began to twist and distort, as if they had a life of their own. The whispers grew clearer, now sounding like calls from trapped souls. "We shouldn't be here," Lily gasped, but at that moment, a giggle echoed from behind them. A pure, yet haunting laugh. A spirit had begun to take notice of them. Before they could react, a faint figure appeared before them from the darkness. It was a woman, but her face was distorted and pale, as if she had been dead for a long time. She looked at them, her lips curling into a grin, her eyes empty of any emotion. "Run!" Lily screamed, and the group turned to flee. But each step they took felt like a fight for survival. The spirits in the park began to awaken, not allowing them to escape. The exit was gone, and they had to face the invisible ghosts, trying to pull them down into the depths of death. They had only one path left: to keep going forward, not looking back, not stopping, because this park had completely changed. Every step the group of friends took in the darkness felt like a race with death itself lurking just ahead. Tonight, the park was no longer the peaceful place they had imagined. It was now filled with countless ghosts beckoning them closer to the realm of the dead. Cold winds blew through the air, carrying the whispers of souls that had been trapped here for a long time. These sounds were not of nature, but ominous whispers, like curses long embedded in the memories of souls unable to find peace. Lily was the first to lose her composure. She ran ahead, her legs seemingly out of control, but the overwhelming sense of unease kept her from stopping. The group tried to keep up, but each step felt like it was pushing them farther away. "We have to get out of here," Sarah screamed, her eyes wide with panic. "There's no way out. I can feel it. Something is watching us." James bit his lip, trying not to let Sarah's scream frighten him. But when he looked back, the faint light from the flashlight illuminated a stone wall that seemed to stretch endlessly, creating an infinite space, as though the park had no end. Why couldn't they get out? They had been walking this path for hours, but nothing had changed. Everything was still the same. Thick darkness, sighs echoing from the dense underbrush. There wasn't a single person in sight, but the feeling that someone was watching their every move made the air feel heavier. Lily stopped and stared at a point in the distance. "Do you see it? There's something in the dark." The group turned to look, but all they saw was empty space. The trees and stone walls stood firm, but for a moment they had the sensation that something was moving. A strange shadow creeping between the ancient trees. "Ethan, are you sure you can find a way out?" James asked, his voice tinged with frustration. Ethan didn't answer immediately, his eyes fixed on a point in the pitch-black space. A cold wind swept through, making him shiver. "We have to keep going. This park, it's not a normal place. I feel like we're being tested." Just as he finished speaking, a strange sound echoed from behind them. A soft footstep, but it reverberated in the stillness as though hundreds of feet were approaching. Each footstep felt powerful enough to stop the group's hearts. They turned, but there was no one there. Only a dark void, like a thick curtain. Lily grabbed Ethan's hand, a sense of panic rising. "What do we do? We can't just stand here." Ethan looked around, his eyes suddenly fixed on a strange mark on an ancient tree. On the tree's trunk, there was a bizarre symbol, like an ancient character drawn in blood. The symbol sent a chill down Ethan's spine. He leaned closer and realized it wasn't fresh blood, but the marks of souls that had been trapped here. These marks had not faded, and they still emitted a putrid smell. "We need to keep moving, but we have to be careful," Ethan whispered, trying to maintain his calm. "This is not a game anymore." The group continued walking, but the sense of dread grew with each step. Once again, the sound of footsteps echoed, but this time they came from both sides. Shadows began to appear, swirling around the ancient trees, as if they had human shapes, but were too indistinct to see clearly. These ghosts began to close in, and they could even hear their breath. Lily suddenly turned around, and in that moment, she saw a ghost with a wrinkled face and empty eyes. The shadow was just a few steps away, but she couldn't move, her legs frozen. "Help me!" Lily screamed, but no one in the group could hear her. They were all being drawn into an inexplicable force, pulling them deeper into the darkness. James tried to pull Lily back, but when he touched her hand, it turned as cold as stone. A bone-chilling cold spread from her hand into James's body, paralyzing him. His eyes glazed over as if something had taken control of him. His hair stood on end, and he could only see the faint light from the flashlight before everything sank into darkness. The group staggered forward, each step feeling like it lasted a century. They couldn't know where they were headed, but they knew they couldn't stop. The souls in the park wouldn't allow them to stop. With each step, each glance backward, more ghosts appeared. But they weren't ordinary images. They were twisted beings that could change shape and overwhelm the minds of the living. As they continued walking, suddenly, a scream rang out. Not from anyone in the group, but from a ghost hiding in the darkness. The scream made it impossible for them to breathe, as though all the air in the park was sucked away. These souls didn't just want to attack. They wanted to claim every remaining soul of the group. "Let's go. Don't get caught," Ethan yelled, gripping Lily's hand, pulling her to run faster. But everything around them remained unchanged. The ghosts continued chasing them, and the only thing they could do was keep running in the darkness. Too terrified to stop, too frightened to look back. They had no idea when they would escape this place. But the one thing they felt was the presence of dark souls lurking somewhere in the shadows, preventing them from escaping the endless spiral of this dark park. Each step they took in this park felt like a struggle against the rising fear within them. The night was no longer something they could face as easily as they had at the beginning. Now, it had become an invisible enemy, one that suffocated them, pressing tightly against their chests. The air in the park grew heavier, as if the entire space was slowly warping into something completely different. The ghosts, the whispers, everything had a cold, dense tone, as if it wanted to swallow them whole. Lily's eyes couldn't tear away from the darkness. She felt that something was watching every move she made, as though every tree, every leaf, had its own consciousness. The ghosts they had seen earlier weren't just vague shapes, but spirits waiting for a chance to strike. Ethan glanced around once more, his eyes dimming in the darkness. "We need to find an exit. If we don't, we won't survive." James, no longer as calm as before, his hands trembling, said, "Where's the exit? We're trapped in a trap we can't escape from." Suddenly, a sharp sound echoed behind them, causing them all to freeze. The sound of footsteps not their own was growing closer, reverberating in the dark. This time, the footsteps weren't distant noises. They were the sound of something moving very close to them. The fear surged within them to an unbearable level. Lily, still holding Ethan's hand tightly, felt her heart stop. "Ethan, what's coming?" Her question was like a whisper in the stillness, but the answer came unexpectedly. A ghost, a blurry figure, stepped out from the shadows, just a few steps away from them. She had long, wet hair clinging to her pale face. Her eyes were endless pits, devoid of life. Her thin lips moved as if saying something, but the sound that emerged was a strange, incomprehensible murmur, like a curse they couldn't understand. "No, no," Sarah screamed, but no one in the group could hear what she was saying. Every sound seemed to be sucked into the darkness around them. The ghost moved closer, stopping right in front of them, then let out a faint, cold laugh. A smile, emotionless and chilling. And just when they thought they could endure no longer, the ghost suddenly vanished into the air as though it had never existed. They all stood frozen, their eyes unwilling to leave the spot where the ghost had disappeared. "We can't stay here any longer," Ethan said, his voice serious. "They won't let us escape." The atmosphere grew increasingly heavy. A cold wind blew through, and as it swept through the ancient trees, all the leaves fell, creating a strange, eerie sound. They didn't know where they were heading, but there was only one feeling in their hearts. They were being led, not towards an exit, but to somewhere else. Somewhere deep in the park, where everything was suffocated by the darkness. As they continued, a new scene appeared before them. A towering stone wall, but unlike the previous walls, this one had a small window through which faint light streamed. "There's an entrance," Ethan said, his eyes suddenly lighting up. The group rushed to the wall, and as they approached the window, they saw a dark corridor, seemingly with no end in sight. "We have to go in," Lily said, her hand trembling but determined. "Maybe this is the way out." They stepped into the corridor, and as soon as their feet touched the ground, the window behind them slammed shut, making the space around them even darker. The only light now came from dim, floating lamps in the air, like torches blown by the wind. At that moment, footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor. This time, not from a ghost, but from a person. A woman, dressed in a white gown, stood silently at the end of the corridor. She didn't move, but the dim light surrounding her made her seem covered by a thin mist. "We have to get past her, right?" James whispered, but the anxiety in his voice was undeniable. Ethan looked at the woman. "No," he replied, his voice serious. "She's not a person. She's one of the trapped souls." The group moved toward the woman, but as they got closer, the light around them grew dimmer, as if something was trying to stop them. The woman began to move, but not in a normal way. She slid along the ground, not walking but floating in midair. Her eyes were dark, void of any emotion. Her gaze touched each person in the group, and just one look from her turned everything around them pitch black. "Don't look into her eyes," Lily screamed. But it was too late. In an instant, a sharp pain shot through each person's head. Strange images, scenes from their past, flashed before their eyes. They saw themselves being dragged into a world they couldn't control, where everything was twisted, distorted. None of them could escape this nightmare. Every image pulled them deeper into a maze with no way out. A maze where the souls of the dead couldn't leave. But when they turned to look at the woman again, she had disappeared, as if she had never existed. Now, they were left together in the darkness. But it wasn't the same darkness they knew. This darkness had changed, awakening something much deeper. And the only thing they could do now was keep moving forward, even though they had no idea where they were heading. The footsteps of the group echoed steadily on the cold stone path, but with each step, it felt heavier, as though the weight of the world was pressing down on their shoulders. The ancient trees loomed like enormous shadows, stretching out into the darkness, as if they wanted to capture them. Everything around them now felt unfamiliar, and fear had taken over the minds of each of them. The park was no longer just a place. It was a labyrinth of mysteries where the darkness seemed alive, as if an invisible spirit was guiding them into an inescapable challenge. "We can't keep going like this," Sarah gasped, her hands trembling as she clutched Ethan's arm. "What are we supposed to do? The path never ends." Ethan looked around, once again, trying to find any sign of an exit. But all he could see was an endless pitch-black space. It seemed like this park had no end, stretching on forever, relentlessly following them. The giant trees showed no signs of stopping, growing taller and taller as though they were trying to swallow them into the darkness. "Didn't we just pass through here?" Lily asked, her eyes frantic as she looked around. She distinctly remembered passing a small forest just minutes ago. But now, the surroundings were completely different. The trees had changed shape, and the path had become vague, disappearing into the darkness. "No way." Ethan shook his head, trying to clarify his thoughts. "This park, it's changing. We can't predict what it's going to do next." Sarah looked up at the sky, but only saw a hazy, foggy night. She felt the silence enveloping them. But there was something even more terrifying than that silence. The feeling that the space around them was not a lifeless entity. It was alive, as if the walls of trees were watching them, waiting. Lily grabbed Ethan's hand, a sense of insecurity overwhelming her. "We can't just keep walking like this. Something is definitely waiting for us at the end of this path." The group continued to move, but the unease grew stronger. It felt like something was silently watching them, the air becoming heavier and suffocating with every breath. Shadows of ghosts appeared in the distance, only to vanish as they approached. But even though they didn't say anything, their presence was like a warning they couldn't ignore. Suddenly, a sound rang out from the distance, the sound of something heavy being dragged along the ground. The noise was unlike anything they had ever heard before. It made them stop for a moment, their limbs frozen in place. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with panic. James looked around, the weak light from the flashlight insufficient to illuminate the dark corners of the park. Someone's coming closer," he said, his voice tense. Immediately, a black shape emerged from the darkness, slithering across the ground like a massive, formless creature, clearly moving towards them. The group couldn't move, standing frozen, unable to even breathe. A foul stench began to emanate from where the shadow appeared, a putrid smell that made them feel nauseous. Lily shut her eyes tightly, unwilling to look forward. "What are we going to do now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We can't stop. These things aren't human." Ethan turned to look at the group, trying to stay calm. "We have to keep going. If we stop, they'll catch us." Everyone nodded, and they continued walking in the darkness. But this time, each step felt like a fight for survival. They couldn't stop, couldn't turn back, because they knew that if they did, they'd be dragged into a bottomless pit with no way out. After walking a bit farther, a scream rang out from the left. It sounded like a woman in agony, as if she were being tortured. Sarah quickly turned around, but all she could see were ghosts drifting in the shadows. "We need to get out of here right now," Sarah screamed, her hands shaking uncontrollably. But when they turned to look behind them, a stone wall appeared, blocking their way. This wall wasn't like the others. It was tall and impossible to climb. "No, "This can't be happening," Ethan shouted. But nothing could change the situation. The group stood frozen, not knowing what to do. They had passed through trails, small forests, and rocky cliffs, but now they were trapped in a sealed space. There was no way out, no path to follow. Only ghosts floating in the thick darkness. And then, once again, footsteps echoed. This time not from a distance, but right behind them. The group turned around, but all they saw was darkness surrounding them. Their eyes shifted backward, and when Ethan's flashlight illuminated the area, the ghost appeared again. But this time, it seemed different. It was a familiar ghost, but not the woman they had seen before. It was a tall figure, its face distorted, with long arms that seemed to reach out, trying to drag them into the dark pit. Its eyes were empty, but there was an eerie light flickering in them, making it impossible for them to look away. "Run!" Ethan screamed, pulling the group forward, despite the ghosts surrounding them. The only thing they could do now was run and hope that an escape was waiting for them at the end of this road. Story 5. The White Shadow in the Final Video. My name is Carter Wells, and I live alone in a small town called Hawthorne, nestled in the northern part of Oregon. There's nothing particularly special about this place. A town the size of a palm, surrounded by woods, with a population of around 4,000. And maybe that's what made it peaceful. Or, at least I used to think so. I work remotely as an IT technician for a company based in Seattle. This secluded lifestyle suits me. No socializing, no interruptions. But for over a week now, every morning when I wake up, I find a strange video clip saved to my phone. Exactly 12 seconds long. No more, no less. I didn't record it. There's no sign of hacking, no suspicious background apps. But what chills me to the bone is the content. A person, standing in the woods, wearing white, long hair draped over most of their face. They do nothing, just take slow steps toward the camera. The first day, they were just a speck in the distance. The second, a little closer. By this morning, day 9, they were only about 10 steps away from the lens. I've tried deleting the clip, changing passwords, even switching phones, but the next morning, it's always back. Always with the same file name. To Scene MP. I thought maybe it was a prank, or someone stalking me. I even installed security cameras around my house. But last night, the cameras recorded nothing. No movement, no sound, no one coming or going. And yet, the clip appeared again. I started asking my neighbors. Mrs. Edna Glass, a widow who lives 2 houses down, told me she once heard about something similar. Over 20 years ago. A boy named Jared, also from this town. Every night, he dreamed of a forest and a woman in white, and each morning he drew what he saw on his bedroom wall. After 7 nights, Jared vanished. No trace left behind. Police found nothing except one final drawing with the words scrawled underneath. Don't let her touch you. I'm not superstitious, but this feeling, it's real, too real. And last night, in my dream, I saw that forest, exactly like in the clip. Dead trees, heavy fog, and the wind hissing in a twisted, inhuman language. I woke up at 2:16 a.m., body frozen, heart pounding, as if I'd just been pulled from the edge of a cliff. I opened my phone. The new clip was already there. But this time, the figure stopped and stared straight at the camera. Her face, blurred like it was veiled in mist, but her eyes, sharp, piercing, not with natural light, but a glow as if shining up from beneath the earth. the light of someone long dead. I brought the clip to an old friend, Josh, who works at the local radio station. He's dealt with strange tapes before, in unresolved investigations. Josh watched the clip in silence, then asked, "You serious? You didn't record this? No? And it appears every morning, exactly at 2:16. He didn't respond. Instead, he walked into the archive room, rummaged through stacks of dusty tapes, and pulled out an old VHS. This was from a truck stop security camera. Year 1998. A driver went missing after pulling over in the woods. This tape's the only thing left behind." We played it, and my heart nearly stopped. On the black and white screen, a figure in white walking through a dark forest. Her movements were identical to the one in my phone clip. Josh slowed down the footage near the end. When she turned to face the camera, we caught a brief glimpse of writing on the collar of her shirt. Marnie? I had never heard that name before. Until tonight. I can't sleep anymore. I've started hearing footsteps outside my window at night. No one shows up on the cameras, but I swear I hear faint scratching, like fingernails dragging across the glass. I tried leaving town, drove 3 hours to Portland, stayed at a friend's place. But the next morning, the clip was there again. It's not the phone. It's not the network. It's me. Something is following me. Last night, I did something stupid. I opened the clip at exactly 2:16 a.m. But instead of playing, the phone's front camera turned on, showing me sitting on the bed. And in that reflection, a pale figure drifted behind me. I whipped around. No one, but the phone slipped from my hand. The screen cracked, and through the shattered display, I saw the words, "I see you now." 3 steps left. I don't know if I can escape this, but I've started documenting everything. Writing, recording, leaving traces. So that if I vanish like Jared, someone will at least know the truth. Because if I'm right tomorrow morning, she'll be just 1 step away. If you're reading this, please, don't open the clip. Don't let anyone in white near you. And if you see someone standing in the forest, don't look them in the eyes. Never look them in the eyes. I don't remember when I fell asleep. Maybe it was just after dawn, after I had locked every window in the house and dragged a chair in front of the bedroom door like some kind of lunatic. What woke me wasn't an alarm, nor sunlight. It was the harsh vibration of my phone rattling on the floor. Its cracked screen glowed with a cold blue light. A message from an unknown number. No contact name. "Can you see me yet?" I held my breath. My heart felt like it was being squeezed shut. With trembling hands, I tapped the familiar video icon. 2:16 M1 this time. I didn't dare watch it immediately. I stood up slowly and pulled the curtain aside. Outside was the hawthorn forest, bare branches pointing at my house like skeletal fingers. The sky was overcast, misting rain cloaking everything like a thin veil. I saw no one, but I still felt watched, as if someone or something was out there, just a blink away. I tried calling Josh, but he didn't pick up. I left a voicemail, then decided to head to his house. Josh lived near the hills, in an area with barely any signal and no neighbors in sight. When I arrived, the front door was unlocked. I stepped in and called out, "Josh, it's me, Carter." No answer. The house was pitch black, and the air smelled of damp rot. I turned on my phone flashlight and moved into Josh's study. Everything was in disarray, papers scattered everywhere, his computer screen shattered, and the VHS player was looping the same tape over and over. I stepped closer, squinting at the screen, flickering black and white footage. A man stumbling through a dark forest. It was Josh. He kept looking back, over his shoulder. Behind him, a white figure floated through the fog. Every step Josh ran, she drifted closer. She wasn't walking. She was gliding, weightless, like something that didn't belong to this world. Josh turned toward the camera, mouth open as if to scream. But the tape stopped. I was shaking. The VHS player ejected the tape automatically. I picked it up. Next to it was a handwritten note. Her name is Mani, but she's not human. Find White Hollow. I didn't know where White Hollow was, but one thing was certain. Josh was gone. Back at home, I searched everything I could about White Hollow. After several failed attempts, I found it. An abandoned tract of land deep in the woods. Once the site of a psychiatric asylum in the late 1930s. It had been deserted after a massive fire that killed over 20 patients. One of the listed victims was Mani Edelton, age 24, institutionalized for extreme identity disorder and paranoid delusions. Her records noted frequent dreams of forests, cryptic mutterings about a divine camera, and an unborn son. Her body was never found. I ran a hand down my face, drenched in sweat. My hands shook so violently, I spilled my coffee across the desk, and then I noticed something strange. In the coffee stain on the wooden surface, 2 tiny handprints appeared, child-sized, unmistakable. I shot up, ran to the storage shed, and hauled out everything I had. Years ago, I bought an old camcorder off eBay. An obscure model from 1986, never used. I loaded the battery and powered it on. The device still worked, but when I looked through the viewfinder, I froze. It was in my storage room, not daylight. It was a forest, pitch black, wind howling. Her, Mani. She stood in frame, motionless, staring straight at me through the lens. I lowered the camera. The room was empty. I looked again through the viewfinder. She was still there. I stumbled backward, dropping the camcorder. It rolled across the floor, lens now facing me. And then I heard the voice, so faint, so distant. The final step. That night, I did something reckless. I plugged my phone into the computer, ready to screen record. I needed proof. Not just for me. In case something happened, someone had to know. 2:15 a.m. The house was unnervingly quiet. No crickets, no wind, just the ticking of a clock, like a countdown. I stared at my phone. At exactly 2:16, a new clip appeared. 2:16 MP4. I hit play. The forest appeared again, but this wasn't the same 12-second loop. The timer was counting upward. 13 seconds, 14, 15. In the video, Mani was now standing right up against the lens. Her face finally visible. Her skin was stitched together with black thread. Her eyes, empty sockets, black voids that seemed to pull me inside. She wasn't just an image anymore. She was alive. At second 16, Mani raised her hand, pale as porcelain, trembling. She reached for the lens. The moment her finger touched the screen, my phone exploded. Smoke poured from it. I collapsed, my head slamming into the corner of the table. Blood poured down my neck. And through the blur, I saw a white figure pass by the doorway. She had entered my house. I woke up in a local hospital. The doctor said I'd suffered a major concussion. But what terrified me wasn't the injury. It was what the nurse said as she left my room. Mr. Carter, when you were brought in, we found a VHS tape in your jacket pocket. It says, final copy, Mani, Do you want to keep it? I don't know what the next chapter will be. All I know is Mani is no longer in the video. She's out. I was discharged from the hospital after 2 days of observation. Though my head was still pounding and the long stitch on my forehead throbbed red, I couldn't bear staying there any longer. The place was too cold. And strangely, the night before, a night nurse told me someone had come looking for me at 2:16 a.m. A woman in white. But by the time we got to the lobby, she had disappeared. I didn't ask any more questions. I knew that wasn't a person, and I knew she wasn't done with me yet. Back at my small house in Hawthorne, I locked every window, covered every mirror, even removed the TV screen entirely. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. As if something was crawling beneath the wooden floors, slipping through door cracks, stalking every breath I took. I powered on my computer and checked the security footage from around my house during my hospital stay. Most clips were normal, but the one recorded exactly at 2:16 a.m., the night before, nearly made me freeze. In the grainy black and white video, a figure stood in front of my house for 12 seconds. No movement, no sound. Hair covering the face, but a pale white dress blurred under the porch light. And then, on the 13th second, the camera feed cut out. 12 seconds. Always that number. I tried to recall the note Josh had left. Find White Hollow. I needed more information, not just about Mani, but the entire burned-down asylum. I went to the town library, which kept records dating back almost a century. The librarian, an older woman named Greta, seemed uneasy when I asked about White Hollow. I used to live near there when I was little, she said, fingers nervously clutching the cross on her necklace. Our house was about a mile from the site. Every night, I'd hear singing from the woods, a woman's voice. But what was scarier was when that singing started coming. From inside the house, I shivered. Greta handed me a yellowed brittle file with a pungent smell of decaying paper. Inside was a list of patients who went missing after the 1939 fire. Mani Eddleton's name was marked in red ink, and beneath it, in black handwritten script, Patient 216. Exhibits behavior linked to phantasmic recording. Avoid contact after lights out. 216. 2:16 a.m. every night. Everything was aligning, like horrifying puzzle pieces falling into place. On my way out of the library, a stranger stopped me. A man in his 50s, wearing a brown coat and a knit cap pulled low over his head. "Are you Carter Wells?" His voice was hoarse, like someone who'd smoked their whole life. Who I am doesn't matter, but I've seen Mani, and I survived. I brought him to a nearby coffee shop. We picked a secluded corner. I could feel the tremor in his hands, even though he tried to hide it. "My name is Howard Lasky," he said. "I was part of the cleanup crew when they tried to tear down what was left of White Hollow in '89. They wanted to build a new town storage facility, but after 3 weeks, everything stopped. People died. People went mad. No one dared go back." I swallowed. "What did you see in there?" Howard stared into my eyes, then spoke slowly. "There was a basement room that didn't exist in the blueprints. We found cameras, old reels, and a wall covered in hundreds of fingernail scratches. But the worst part was, we played one of the tapes. Mani was in it, staring into the lens, like she was still waiting for someone to come back. That night I didn't sleep. I retrieved the VHS tape from the hospital and played it in the living room. The forest scene appeared again. But this time, it wasn't just Marnie. There were two people. Someone was standing behind her, wearing a jacket exactly like Josh's. I screamed, paused the tape, rewound, zoomed in. No doubt, it was Josh. His eyes looked empty, like he was hypnotized. And Marnie? She was smiling. A twisted smile, slashed from cheek to ear. I sent the video to Howard. His reply was only one sentence. It's chosen the next one. You can't stop it now. I wanted to believe this was all in my head. Just trauma. But when I picked up my phone and opened the camera, I saw something impossible. In the corner of the room behind me, where I kept my old camcorder, a white blur slid past, not visible in real life, only on the screen. I ran to check, no one there. But the camcorder had turned on by itself. The lens was pointed straight at me, and on its tiny screen, flickering in red letters, it read, "You've entered my film, forever." The house began making strange sounds. At first it was creaking wood. Then came faint giggles. From the bathroom, I switched on the light and rushed in. Empty. But on the mirror, a handprint appeared. Like someone had been standing there, watching me, even though the room was still. I tore the mirror down, smashed it. Shards scattered across the floor. And in one large piece, Marnie's reflection stood behind me. I turned around. No one. But the window was wide open. I don't know how much time I have left. Each night, the clips grow longer. Each time I watch, she takes another step forward. And now, she's not just in the videos. She touched me. I can feel myself changing, like someone else is inside me. A voice whispering every night, telling me to turn on the camera, telling me to stand in front of the lens. Maybe I'm becoming the next part of this story. If anyone reads this, stay away from Hawthorne. Don't open the clip. And if you see someone in white standing in the woods, don't look back, not even once. Story 6. The Spirit Unaware of Its Death. My name is Jason, 32 years old, living in the state of Maine, where dense forests always seem to be hiding something between the swaying leaves. I work as an independent delivery driver, constantly traveling between small towns. Millbury was one of them. A quiet, hidden place tucked deep in the woods, sparsely populated, and everyone there seemed reserved. But what I'm about to tell you isn't just another delivery story. It's what changed the way I see the world. About life, death, and souls that have been left behind. That afternoon, I drove to Millbury to deliver a box of old books for a personal order. What caught my attention was the handwritten address on the package, written in shaky penmanship. Mrs. Adeline Brown, 136 Maple Street. The sender was a used bookstore in Boston. They told me the package must be delivered by hand, not left on the porch. Maple Street sat on the outskirts of town, close to the shadowy pine forest. I remember the sun was nearly setting, the red light slicing through the trees, making everything look like it was bleeding. When I pulled up to house number 136, I hesitated for a few seconds. That house was different. Every other home on the street had nameplates, mailboxes, a couple of cars parked out front, the sounds of kids playing or dogs barking in the distance. But this one was completely still. The paint was peeling, shutters hung loosely as if ready to fall, and the front yard was choked with knee-high weeds. I stepped onto the creaky wooden porch and knocked. A moment later, the door swung open. Not slowly, like in horror movies, but wide and abruptly, like someone had been standing just behind it, waiting. An elderly woman, maybe in her 70s, stood there. Her silver hair was neatly pinned up, and she wore a faded floral dress. She smiled gently. "You've come," she said, her voice raspy but warm. "I was worried you wouldn't find the way." I blinked. "Are you Mrs. Brown?" "Adeline," she nodded. "Come in. It's getting cold." Though a bit uneasy, I stepped inside. There was something about her that made it hard to say no. Not fear, but an odd feeling of sympathy. Inside, the house was eerily clean. The scent of herbal tea floated through the air, and soft vintage jazz played from an old radio on the wooden cabinet. I placed the package on the table and was about to excuse myself when Mrs. Adeline had already poured 2 cups of tea and gestured to the chair across from her. "Are you in a rush? I don't get many visitors. Not since my husband passed, and my son. Well, he's far away." I sat down. Her hands trembled slightly as she handed me the tea. The wall behind her was lined with old photographs. A man with a thick mustache in a navy uniform. A boy in a tiny vintage suit, wearing a stern expression far too serious for his age. She told me about her husband, Walter, who died of a stroke in 1997. Her son, Benjamin, once a med student, had left after a heated argument in 2005 and never returned. "He never came back," she sighed, "but I believe someday he will." I left the house just as the sun dipped fully behind the trees. On the way back to my car, I caught a glimpse of something in the upstairs window. A shadowy figure standing behind the curtain. I turned quickly to look again, but there was nothing. 3 days later, still curious, I asked the gas station attendant at the edge of town about Mrs. Adeline. The middle-aged man froze. "That house has been abandoned," he said. "No one's lived there for 8 years." I chuckled, thought he was mistaken. "I just delivered a package to Mrs. Adeline Brown a few days ago. She's still living there." His face went pale. "You joking?" "Adeline Brown hanged herself in that house back in 2017. The town sheriff found her." I froze. He rummaged through a drawer and pulled out an old yellowed newspaper. Page 3, headline, "Lonely woman found hanged in forgotten home." The photo underneath, her face, that same gentle smile, the same woman. The next day, I returned to 136 Maple Street. This time the door didn't open. I knocked, called her name. No answer. I walked around the back. A broken window. Everything inside coated in dust. The chair where she sat, the teacup she poured. All still there, but lifeless. As if untouched for years. I was about to leave when I heard something from upstairs. A soft voice singing. A woman's voice. That old jazz melody. That voice, it was hers. I ran. That night I couldn't sleep. One question kept looping in my head. If a soul is so lonely, it doesn't know it's already dead. Can it continue living in a fractured memory? Or worse, can it pull the living into that memory with it? But the story doesn't end there. Because 1 week later, I received a package, no return address. Inside, an old photo album. On the last page, a photo of me sitting in that same kitchen with Mrs. Adeline. I never saw anyone holding a camera that day, and I'm sure I didn't smile for any photo, but in the picture, I was smiling. A smile. That wasn't mine. It took me a full week to try and forget that photo. The photo I never took. The one where a strange version of myself. was smiling in the kitchen of a woman who had died 8 years ago. I stuffed it into a drawer, trying to convince myself it was just a sick joke from someone in town. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop my eyes from drifting toward Maple Street every time I drove by. Something pulled me back. Not curiosity. Something heavier, like I was being watched. Then the dreams began. In every dream, I returned to that house, always the same. I stood before the door, raised my hand, knocked 3 times, and it slowly creaked open. No one inside. Just an empty hallway, bathed in dim yellow light and the slow ticking of a clock that stretched every second into hours. I never stepped through the doorway. Until the last night. That night, I crossed the threshold, and the door shut behind me. I decided to go back to 136 Maple Street. Not for work, not because someone asked me to. Simply because I couldn't live with the unanswered questions. But this time, I didn't go alone. I went to the Millbury Town Library, asking for records on the house. A young woman named Cassidy, the librarian, perked up when I mentioned 136. "You said you met Mrs. Adeline Brown?" She raised an eyebrow. "I used to live nearby as a kid. That house always felt wrong. My mom forbade me from going near it. We sat in the archive room, surrounded by the smell of old paper and stacks of yellowed boxes." Cassidy pulled out a folder labeled Property Records. 136 Maple Street. I expected to find only the names Adeline and Walter Brown. But I was wrong. Before them, in 1983, the house had belonged to a couple named Philip and Marianne Lowell. Next to the ownership file was a clipping from a local newspaper. "Child missing after family dispute. Police find no trace in the surrounding area." Dated April 17, 1983. The photo showed a boy around 6 years old. Big eyes, familiar features. I pulled out the photo Adeline had once shown me. Her son Benjamin. Identical. Cassidy leaned in close and whispered, "Don't you think this is too much of a coincidence?" We decided to return to the house together later that evening. The wind had picked up. Gray clouds blanketed the sky like a curtain of warning. When we arrived, the house didn't seem as dusty as before. The weeds in the yard were trampled. The upstairs window was closed now, but what chilled me to the bone was the front door. It wasn't shut, just ajar, like it had been waiting for us. Cassidy reached for the handle. "I'll go in first," she said, her voice trembling slightly, though her eyes stayed resolute. Inside, everything looked staged, as if the house remembered itself. The kitchen light was on. Tea already poured on the table. But this time, there was a note taped to the fridge with old yellowed tape. "Benjamin, if you're reading this, I'm still waiting for you to come home. Don't be afraid of the attic. I've locked it." Cassidy and I locked eyes. The attic? We hadn't seen any stairs leading to an attic last time. But now, just past the living room hallway, a wooden door had appeared. Old, with a tarnished brass handle. Cassidy turned on her phone's flashlight and shone it at the door. A series of tiny handprints, coated in dust, appeared, as if someone or something had tried to open it from the inside. When the door creaked open, a wave of cold air rushed out, sending shivers through both of us. A narrow staircase led into darkness. The air reeked of damp earth and something else, something that smelled like rotting flesh. We descended slowly, Cassidy's flashlight trembling in her grip. Its beam fell on stone walls. Drawings in charcoal. Children, a woman, and a man engulfed in flames. At the base of the wall was an old wooden box. I opened it. Inside was a torn cloth doll, so old it was nearly disintegrated, and a stack of black and white photos. Photos of children, all different ages, but they all had one thing in common: the same face. Benjamin. I flipped to the last image, but it wasn't a photo, it was a shaky pencil drawing. A woman hanging from the ceiling by a rope around her neck, a child at her feet, clutching their head, screaming, and behind them, me. I was standing there, in the drawing, watching. I dropped the paper, and suddenly the flashlight went out. Cassidy screamed. A dry, rattling noise echoed behind us. The sound of small footsteps, rapid and scattered, like children, running through the dark. I fumbled with the flashlight. It flickered on. But Cassidy was gone. Only me remained, and the last drawing, now face down on the ground. I turned it over. A new figure had appeared. A girl with long hair, wearing Cassidy's coat, standing behind me, her hand on my shoulder. I don't remember how I got out. All I know is when I opened my eyes, I was lying on the roadside. My car was still parked out front, its doors wide open, hazard lights flickering like a glitching heartbeat. Cassidy was gone. The police found no evidence, no DNA, no footprints. No one remembered ever seeing Cassidy in town, not even the librarians. And the photo? I brought it home, but by morning, it was gone. All that remained was the ragged doll, sitting in the center of my kitchen table, and beneath it, a handwritten note. Jason, you've come home. Don't leave again. Mom, since that night, I haven't been the same. I no longer dare sleep with the lights off. I avoid staring at any photograph in the house. And most importantly, I don't talk to anyone about Cassidy. Because some part of me knows that if I do, they'll think I'm insane. Or worse, they'll make me start believing it myself. But the worst part isn't her disappearance, or the eyes of the woman in the photo. What haunts me day by day is that final note. Jason, you're home now. Don't ever leave again. Mom, I never knew my biological mother. My adoptive father always deflected whenever I asked about her. But I can't believe that was a coincidence. Adeline, she once mentioned a son who had run away. Benjamin, and now, that final drawing in the basement. Me, Cassidy, and the screaming child beneath the hanging corpse. It was all twisting together into a spiritual labyrinth with no way out. I needed to find out more about Benjamin Brown. Millbury doesn't have a psychiatric hospital, but 12 miles out, beyond a dark pine forest and into the fog-shrouded lands, there once stood a place called Rose Hill Treatment Center, where those deemed a danger to themselves or society were confined. Rose Hill was shut down in 2009 due to lack of funding. But locals believe the real reason ran deeper. I drove there on a drizzling Saturday afternoon. The sky hung low, heavy and gray. The rusted front gate creaked with an eerie screech as I gently pushed it open. Beneath the faded signage, a line had been crudely scratched in, but still readable. This is a memory, not reality. Inside, the hallway stretched on endlessly. Empty examination rooms, files scattered everywhere, as if someone had tried to destroy them in a panic. But I didn't need to search long. The file archive room was still locked. I used a crowbar I'd brought along, broke the lock, and tore through each drawer. The last file I found read, 7/4/19, Benjamin Lowell Brown, date of admission, October 2006, age 17. Diagnosis, dissociative disorder, Violent tendencies, hallucinations related to deceased mother. I swallowed hard as I reached the scrawled handwritten note at the bottom of the page. Patient insists his mother is still living at 136 Maple Street and frequently speaks to him. And then a final section, crossed out in red ink. When questioned about the woman in the painting, patient became violent. Staff is advised not to mention the smile on the ceiling. It is a severe, delusional trigger. I froze, the smile on the ceiling. My flashlight suddenly flickered. Wind began to whistle down the hallway, even though no windows were open. And then I heard wheels rolling. I turned. An old, rusted medical cart was slowly rolling out into the hallway, moving on its own, no one pushing it. Just the sound of faint footsteps behind me. I whipped around. No one there. But something had just breathed down my neck. I fled Rose Hill in a panic. When I returned to the car, I saw a long scratch running from the rear bumper all the way up to the window. And sitting on the driver's seat was the old photo of Cassidy, the one I knew I had thrown away. But this time, in the photo, Cassidy was standing inside one of Rose Hill's hallways, eyes shut, arms limp at her sides like a lifeless puppet. I don't know why I haven't run from all this. Maybe I've already gone insane. Or maybe I'm caught in something beyond reason. That night I drove to see my adoptive father. He lives a few hours from Millbury on a small farm near the New Hampshire border. I hadn't asked him about my biological mother since I was 16. But this time, I needed the truth. He sat in silence for a long time after I told him everything. About the house, about Adeline Brown, about Rose Hill and Benjamin. Finally he said, "Your birth mother's name was Marianne Lowell." My heart stopped. Lowell, the same name as the woman who lived at 136 Maple Street before the Browns. He sighed, eyes avoiding mine. She didn't kill herself. She was imprisoned in that house. Her husband, Philip, locked her in the basement for nearly 2 years because he believed she was possessed. They had a son who went missing. Police never found the body. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since I'd arrived. "Jason, you were that boy. I don't remember how I left the farm. Everything was spinning. The sky was pitch black. The wind howled like someone sobbing. I couldn't deny it anymore. I'm not Jason. Not the way I thought. I'm Benjamin. Or at least, part of him, Adeline. She wasn't my birth mother. She was the woman I met growing up in the hallucinations. A stand-in, a soul who never realized she was dead and didn't realize she'd been pulling me with her all these years. That night, I returned to the house again under heavy rain. The porch light was still on. Tea had already been poured, but this time there were 3 cups. I sat down, hands trembling. From the staircase, a woman emerged. Tangled hair, sunken eyes, slow steps. "Jason, or Benjamin, you finally come home." I opened my mouth to ask something, but the teacup slipped from my hand. Not because I dropped it, but because my hand had vanished. I looked down. My body was fading. Story 7. Don't Look Under the Bed. My name is Angela Crowley, and I live in a small town called Willard's Grove, about a 2-hour drive from Boston. This town is quiet, almost dull, if not outright lifeless. After my husband died in a workplace accident 3 years ago, I moved into a small house at the end of Hearthstone Street with my 8-year-old daughter, Emily. The house is an old Victorian, with dark wooden paneling and an attic that groans whenever the wind picks up. We chose it because it was cheap and had a big enough backyard for Emily to plant her wildflowers. At the time, I had no idea this place would become the starting point for something so horrifying. It would make me question my own grip on reality. It all began on a Wednesday night. I was sitting in the living room, typing up a weekly report on my laptop. Emily had gone to bed early, complaining she'd heard someone crying under the bed. I chuckled, brushing it off as a child's nightmare. Probably from watching too many spooky cartoons like Coraline or Monster House. But right at 12:16 a.m., just as the ticking of the wall clock fell into a rhythm, I heard it. Crying. A child. Sobbing, weak, interrupted, uneven. And the most chilling part, it wasn't coming from Emily's room. It came from beneath the floorboards. More specifically, beneath my bedroom. I crept upstairs. Every wooden step groaned under my weight, like the house itself was protesting my presence at that hour. As I approached my bedroom, I paused and listened. Nothing. Only the wind slipping through the window cracks. I opened the door and stepped inside. Shined my flashlight under the bed. Nothing. Until I stood up. Right there, on the hardwood floor beside the bed, was a bloody handprint, smeared and trailing toward the bottom of the closet. I froze. Mouth dry, the flashlight trembled in my hand. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I just slowly backed out of the room, locked the door, and spent the rest of the night asleep on the living room couch. The next morning, I told Emily it was probably a leaking pipe, and that the stain was just rust from old plumbing. I didn't want to scare her, but she just looked at me, eyes full of quiet disbelief. "You didn't hear it, did you?" "Hear what?" "That child, the one who cries every night, Mommy," he told me. "Not to tell you." That's when I installed a small camera in the bedroom. Not because I believed in ghosts or hauntings, but because I needed proof. I needed to know if I was losing my mind. That night, I stayed in the living room again. At exactly 12:16, like it was on a schedule, the crying returned. At first, it sounded like a recording, but this time, it felt closer, more frantic. And then came a soft rustling, like someone dragging themselves across the wooden floor with their elbows. I sat up straight, opened the camera feed on my phone. The bedroom was dark. Only the dim infrared glow captured anything. Then suddenly, a small withered hand reached out from beneath the bed. I froze. The hand had no fingernails, just bleeding stubs where they should have been, and it began scraping at the floor, dragging something behind it. Something that looked like a faceless child. I dropped the phone and bolted upstairs to Emily's room. She was still asleep, but on the white bedsheet, a trail of blood leading from the foot of her bed toward the door. I called the police. They arrived, checked every corner, declared there were no signs of forced entry, no vandalism, and concluded that I might be experiencing post-loss stress. I said nothing, but deep down, I knew something lives in this house, and it wants Emily. 2 days later, I took her to stay with my sister in Vermont, just for a few weeks, somewhere safe. I returned to the house alone to pack, get it ready for sale. That night I did something insane. I lay at the edge of my bed, eyes locked on the dark void beneath it. The clock hit 12:16. Nothing. Until a pair of eyes opened beneath me. Not a child's eyes, but the eyes of a grown man, bloodshot and unblinking. "Give her back to me." A low, hoarse voice drifting up from under the bed. I tumbled onto the floor, flashlight slipping from my grasp. When I got back up, nothing beneath the bed, but on the pillow, written in blood, "Emily is mine." I woke up in the middle of the night, my head pounding like it had been split open. Not from lack of sleep, but from the dream, or rather, the memory. I saw Sam, my husband, standing in the old shed behind our backyard. He was digging, not in soft soil. He was breaking through a cracked cement floor. His face was tight with tension, sweat pouring from his brow, and in his hands, a small black bundle. He buried it deep, scattered lime over it, then patched the cement like nothing had ever happened. That memory couldn't be real. I'd never seen anything like that when Sam was alive, but it played out in my head with vivid clarity, like I was the one holding the shovel that day. The next morning, I put on a heavy coat, grabbed a shovel, and headed to the backyard. The shed was nearly falling apart, the door hanging by a rusted hinge. I stepped inside. The cold seeped through every layer of fabric. The floor still had the faint crack I'd never noticed before, the same spot from my dream. I crouched down and struck it hard with the shovel. The cement cracked open, and after just 3 hits, I saw a corner of torn black plastic. I staggered back, hands trembling. Inside was an old yellowed photograph. A young girl, about Emily's age, standing in front of an abandoned house. Behind her, barely visible in the grain of the image, was a man who looked exactly like Sam. Beside the photo was a copy of a death certificate. The name, Lila Crowley, deceased 2011. Cause of death, missing, presumed dead. Legal guardian, Sam Crowley. I had never heard of a Lila. Sam had never mentioned her. I called my former mother-in-law, Doris. Her voice was as frail as ever. But when I said the name Lila, she went silent. 12 whole seconds passed. Then she asked, How do you know that name?" "I found papers in the shed." "Who was she, Mom?" Don't dig any deeper, Angela. Some secrets should stay buried." "I have to know. Something is haunting Emily. I can't pretend it's not real anymore." Doris's voice shook. "Lila was Sam's daughter, with a woman named Marlene. His mother didn't approve, so the baby was sent into foster care. But later, she went missing from the group home. Sam went mad. He searched everywhere. Once, I caught him whispering to someone in the mirror, 'I think she died.' And Sam never recovered." That night I didn't sleep. I sat in front of the bedroom mirror, where moonlight streamed through the curtains, casting flickering shadows. I kept thinking about what Doris said. Sam used to whisper into the mirror. Then the clock struck 12:16. The crying started again, but this time it didn't come from under the bed. It came from inside the mirror. I stepped closer, breath fogging the glass. The crying faded, and suddenly, a face appeared behind me. Sam. He didn't speak. He just stared at me. But his face had no eyes. I spun around. Nothing. No one there. When I looked back at the mirror, letters written in blood began to appear. "I didn't kill her, but she has to come back." I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I drove to the group home where Lila once stayed. Using the address from the papers, the building was abandoned, the gate rusted and leaning. Moss covered the stone steps. I pushed the door open. No one stopped me. No one remained to guard the place. Childish scribbles still decorated the hallway walls. One drawing froze me in place. A child curled up under a bed with hollow black eyes. Next to it, a message written in jagged letters. Mommy, I'm here. I made my way to the old administrator's office. In a forgotten drawer, I found a worn notebook. The last page read, Lila exhibits signs of sleepwalking. She hides under beds, whispering, Daddy will find me. Once, we lost track of her for an entire night. When we found her, she was sitting inside a closet, staring into a mirror, grinning. After that, she vanished. No sign of forced entry. I left the place with my heart pounding like war drums. Everything, the bed, the mirror, the blood. It all led back to Lila. But she wasn't trying to hurt me. She was asking for help. When I got home, I saw the most terrifying thing yet. The front door, wide open, muddy child-sized footprints scattered across the floor. And on the living room wall, written in blood, Mommy, why did you leave me? I bolted up to Emily's room. Empty, no one there. I called my aunt, asking if Emily had arrived yet, but her voice cracked on the line. Angela? She left early this morning. I thought you were picking her up. I collapsed on the floor. The clock struck 12:16 a.m. And this time, I didn't hear crying. I heard a lullaby coming from under the bed. I don't know how long I sat motionless at the bottom of the stairs. The kitchen clock had stopped. The second hand frozen exactly at 12:16. On the wall, the blood-red message, Mom, why did you leave me, was still wet. It couldn't be a prank, and it definitely wasn't from Emily. She never wrote in perfect uppercase letters. And the blood, it wasn't from the living. I dragged myself up to the bedroom. The door was still slightly ajar. A freezing chill seeped out like from a sealed-off ice cellar. Under the bed, once just a quiet dark space, now looked like an open gateway, pulsing and alive like a gaping mouth. I didn't call Emily's name anymore. I could hear her, a soft giggle, and mixed within it, a lullaby, a melody unlike any song I'd ever heard. Its lyrics whispered directly inside my mind. Stay still now, don't make a sound, Daddy's coming, Mom's not around. I pulled a flashlight from the drawer, tucked a kitchen knife into my coat pocket. My mind screamed at me to run, but my heart cried louder. Emily was on the other side. I knelt down and shone the flashlight beneath the bed. It lit up the back wall, but there was no reflection. As if I was shining it into an endless void, I took a deep breath and crawled in. At first, I thought I was just crawling across the dusty wooden floor, but after a few seconds, my back turned icy, like I was lying on frozen stone. The air thickened, reeking of blood and rot. I looked back, and the way out was gone. The underside of the bed had vanished. I was now in a narrow, stretching hallway, with walls lined with portraits of children. Each child had no eyes. Etched beneath each photo, like carved with fingernails, were lines that read, Mom didn't believe me. I cried, but no one heard. I died under my own bed. I kept walking. My footsteps made no sound, as if I no longer had any weight. Every step drew me deeper into a world where childhood pain was trapped and fed upon. At the end of the hallway was a rotting wooden door, marked by a small bloody handprint. I pushed it open. Inside was a room identical to Emily's bedroom, but reversed. The mirror sat at the head of the bed. The wardrobe leaned toward the ceiling. The window didn't look out onto the backyard. but into a muddy graveyard where faceless children dragged themselves forward in a line. On the bed sat a small figure, back turned, long black hair covering all. Emily? The figure didn't answer, but its face began to turn toward me, though its neck didn't move. Not Emily. It was Lila, but her face was torn, like someone had tried to rip her mouth open to silence her. Daddy said, "Mommy was the first to forget me." The voice came from her shredded mouth, piercing my ears like a blade. I stepped backward and bumped into something behind me. A mirrored wardrobe, and in the mirror, Emily was inside, bound, tied down by ropes that looked like twisted roots. She screamed, but no sound came out. I pounded the glass, screaming, "Let her go!" Laughter echoed around the room, and then a deep, hollow man's voice speaking from every direction. "She is part of Lila, blood to blood, soul to soul. I'm only reclaiming what was always mine." I turned Sam, or rather, what was left of him. He stood in the center of the room, taller, thinner, eyes sunken into black pits. In his hands was a rotting doll, its face missing a nose, the mouth sewn shut. You knew Emily wasn't just ours. She carries Lila's soul. I'm only helping her come back. I threw the knife. It passed through him like slicing fog. "If you want her back," Sam pointed at the floor beneath me, "then go downstairs." The floor cracked, and I fell. I woke up in a dirt cell, its walls smeared with dried blood and claw marks. In front of me was a small wooden bed. Emily lay on it, eyes closed. Beside her pillow sat a small box. I rushed to her, pulling her into my arms. She didn't respond. Hands trembling, I opened the box. Inside was a dried-up heart. Carved into it was the name Lila, and tucked beside it, a handwritten note in my own handwriting. "To save Emily, you must find a forgotten memory. If not, her soul will belong to this place forever." Story 8. The Room Reserved for the Dead. I never believed in ghosts. Seriously. Ever since I was a kid, I'd always been the rational one in the family. The girl who would shine a flashlight into the closet when my little brother screamed that something was watching him. I even burst out laughing when Mom warned me never to place a mirror facing the bed. Those things to me were superstition. Leftovers from a time when people didn't understand the world. That was before I moved into that house. It sat in a small town called Wilford, up in Northern Virginia. I found the place through a cheap rental website, and at $850 a month for a full 3-bedroom home, I couldn't resist. I was a newly divorced elementary school teacher, 1 year out of a bad marriage, desperate for a fresh start. Wilford was quiet, surrounded by forest with cool, clean air. Perfect, except for one odd line in the lease agreement I had overlooked. The 3rd bedroom may not be suitable for individuals with sleep disorders or a history of sleepwalking. No explanation. I figured it was just a weird legal disclaimer. Maybe the room had poor insulation or weird acoustics. So I ignored it. I took the master bedroom, turned the 2nd into my home office, and used the 3rd, the problem room, as a storage space. Its only window looked out onto a dense grove of black pine trees. I kept the curtains drawn, and the air inside was strange. At first I thought it lacked its own AC vent, but even when it was 95 degrees outside, something about that room felt cold, like someone had opened a walk-in freezer and never shut the door. The first week went by without issue. I met the neighbors, picked up a summer tutoring gig at the local school, and spent my nights reading or prepping lesson plans. But on the eighth night, I heard the knocking. Not at the front door, at the third bedroom door. 3 knocks. Tap, tap, tap. Then silence. The clock read 3:42 a.m. I froze. Every door had been locked from the inside. I lived alone. No pets. No spare keys given to anyone. I didn't open the door. The next morning, I found footprints in the dust, pale gray, like ash, stamped across the white bedsheet inside that room. There were no drag marks from the door, no dirt, no footprints leading to the bed. Just prints, small, round, oddly long, like a child's, starting at the foot of the bed and fading toward the window. I cleaned them up, told myself it was bugs, or maybe soot from the AC. I tried to shake it off, but then it happened again. On the 10th night, I locked the third room with a gun cabinet chain lock. I even wedged a chair under the doorknob. For good measure, I placed a cold can of soda on the floor to test the temperature. Some ridiculous experiment from a woman starting to doubt her own sanity. I pulled back the curtains this time, letting the moonlight in. That night I dreamed. I was standing at the room's doorway. Something pale sat at the foot of the bed. It didn't move. It had no face. I couldn't see its eyes, but I knew it was staring straight at me. When I stepped inside, the air crushed against my chest like a collapsing lung. Then I woke up. The clock, 2:47 a.m. The door, wide open. The chair had been moved. The chain lock, still hooked on the doorknob, not broken, just unlatched. The soda can on the floor, tipped over, but untouched, and that same white mist like breath on ice, curling up from the floor. I stepped inside. There were footprints again, but this time, 2 sets, one small and one much larger. They stood side by side at the foot of the bed, like 2 people were standing there, watching me sleep. I started recording everything. Nighttime audio logs, mini cameras in the room, even a thermal sensor I bought on Amazon. What I found made my chest seize. At 3 a.m., the room's temperature always dropped to 38 partigu, nearly freezing, while the rest of the house stayed steady at 74 partigu. The camera caught odd movements, blurred shadows darting past, sometimes a warped figure standing still in the corner for 17 minutes straight before vanishing. One night, I heard a lullaby, soft, distant, a woman's voice, humming something off-key. That's when I called Amanda, my college roommate, and now a psychology researcher in DC. She didn't believe in ghosts, but she did believe in how the mind responds to fear and environment. She drove up that weekend, bringing EMF meters and some EEG gear. She slept in that room, just once. The next morning, Amanda walked out, pale as death, as if she'd survived a lifetime in one night. She didn't say a word. She packed up. Before she left, she just said, "Don't sleep in there, please." I begged her to explain. She only shook her head. That evening, she sent me an email. It was a newspaper clipping from 1997. 7-year-old Melanie Grace was found deceased inside the home at 41 Forest Edge Drive. Her mother, Sarah Grace, was missing from the scene. Motive unknown. That address was my house. I knew I had to leave. But the night before Paranam, my plan to move out, something happened. Something I can never unsee. At 3 a.m., a note slid under my bedroom door. Folded neatly in 4 on it scribbled in pencil. If you leave, it will follow you. I had planned to leave. Honestly, after that night, after receiving that crudely scribbled note with the words, "If you leave, it will follow," I had packed everything, every box, every suitcase, my whole life tucked neatly into an old SUV parked outside the front door. But then, I did something stupid. I went back into that room, one last time, to say goodbye. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe it was a foolish impulse. Or maybe something inside that room wanted me to return. The door opened like it had been waiting. No creak, no groaning hinges. Just a thick silence spilling out, like the entire room was holding its breath. I stepped inside. The white bedsheet still had the dusty footprints from the night before. But this time, there was something else. A line of writing etched in dust across the center of the mattress. "Have you seen me in the mirror yet?" I stumbled back, hitting the doorframe. My heart pounded. Dust. No one can write like that with dust. The fine particles had been arranged as if by dry skeletal fingers. I fled the room, intending to run straight to the car. But as I passed the bathroom in the hallway, I froze. The mirror above the sink was fogged, not from a shower. No one had bathed. The hot water heater had been unplugged since yesterday. Yet, the mirror was fully fogged, like someone had been breathing against it. And right there, in the middle of the misted surface, was a handprint. I swear I never touched the mirror. Trembling, I raised my hand and placed it over the mark. It was far smaller than mine, child-sized. But what made my breath catch in my throat was this. It had 6 fingers. I burst into tears. I don't remember how I got back to my bedroom. All I know is that I ended up sitting on the bed, surrounded by packed boxes, pillows, and bags I never loaded into the car. I didn't leave. I couldn't. The next day, I called Mr. Lewis, the elderly neighbor across the street. For the first time, I asked about the history of the house. His voice was low and slow, like he'd been waiting for that question for years. "You're renting that place?" He sighed. "Well, the last tenant only lasted 13 days. I said nothing. Before that, it was a single mother, moved in with her 7-year-old daughter. The little girl disappeared after a few weeks. The mother vanished. Police only found dried blood under the bed. Mr. Lewis told me the previous tenants all complained about a cold room. Some dreamed of a white figure sitting at the foot of their bed. Some said they were choked in their sleep. Some heard whispers inside the mirrors. One couple even brought in an exorcist, but left after a week without a word. I asked, "So who owns the house now?" He replied, "Someone named Randall Grace, brother of Sarah Grace, the missing mother from 1997. I immediately searched online. Randall Grace once worked at a private psychiatric facility in Kentucky. There wasn't much on him, just a few scattered articles, but there was one old interview on YouTube. Randall in a grey jacket, hollow-eyed, stuttering about spiritual parasitic disorders and mirror-bound vessels. A chill ran down my spine. That night, I took down the bathroom mirror. On the back, there was something scratched in faintly, like with a nail or sharp metal. Shallow, but still readable. Don't look in the mirror after 3. 3 a.m. The hour of knocks. The hour of dusty footprints. The hour of the white shadow. I started noticing that my reflection wasn't quite mine. The first time, it was the rearview mirror. I was parked outside a grocery store and saw myself in the mirror, smirking, but I wasn't smiling. The second time was in my bedroom. The vanity mirror. I blinked, but my left eye blinked alone. The right one stayed wide open, as if the mirror was testing me. I hid the mirror. Then I removed every mirror in the house, but the horror was, the mirrors came back. The next morning, the bathroom mirror was back in place. The scratch on the back? Gone. No one else had keys. No one came in. I thought I was going insane until my phone received a message from an unlisted number. The mirror only reflects what's already in you. Don't blame me. I froze. For several seconds, all sound vanished. The house became too quiet. That night, I tried one last thing. I placed the vanity mirror in the center of the cold room, closed the door, set up a camera pointing at it. I didn't sleep. I stayed in the living room, watching the live feed on my phone. 2:59 a.m. The mirror reflected an empty room. 3 hours. The image flickered. 3:01. Something slid over the edge of the bed. Not a person. Something long, thin, like a single strand of hair, magnified to stretch meters. It crawled toward the mirror, then stood. It was me, but not me now. A different version. Wearing the nightgown I had in high school. Hair longer. Eyes black. No whites. She looked into the mirror, smiled, and then the feed went dead. The next morning, the mirror was shattered. Fragments scattered across the cold floor, but written in blood on the tiles was a message. If you remember me, I will remember everything. I don't know who she is. Is she me? The shadow I've hidden inside myself? Or is she Melanie, the little girl from long ago, using me to return? I don't know. But every time I look in a mirror now, I see a strange new mark growing behind my neck. Like a tiny eye slowly opening. The strange events in that house weren't over yet, even though I had done everything I could to avoid the third room. The room where it all began. The strange footprints. The carvings in the mirror. The cold handprints I couldn't explain. I knew I couldn't just keep running. I was still being watched. The reason I hadn't left, the reason I couldn't leave, was because of the funeral. That night, just as I stepped out of the bathroom, I received a call from Amanda. She had returned to D.C. the week before, but this time her voice sounded urgent, almost panicked. Sarah Grace just passed away. You need to come, Lisa. That house, that room. There's something worse than anything I've ever studied. Amanda explained she had stumbled across a local obituary announcing the death of Sarah Grace, Melanie's mother, the woman who had vanished nearly 30 years ago. But strangely, the death wasn't widely reported. Only a few people seemed to know, and the event itself was to be held as a private funeral. Family only. I knew I had to go. That feeling, a strange pull, like I was being drawn into something I couldn't escape, was undeniable. The funeral took place in a smaller house, located on a street I'd never visited. The address, 342 Thornwood Avenue, wasn't listed on any signs. The house itself was old, gloomy, overgrown with green moss, as if it had been abandoned for years. The front door was ajar, but no one greeted me. Only a shadow stood still in the dimming light. The man, Randall Grace, Sarah's younger brother, had a face completely devoid of emotion. His eyes were deep, as though staring into something long lost. But what disturbed me most was the way he looked. Not at me, but through me. like he was watching something invisible standing behind my back. I asked if I could attend the funeral. He nodded coldly, without a word. He led me into the living room, where a plain wooden casket sat. Draped in white cloth, only Sarah's withered hands were exposed, her fingers thin and brittle, as if they might snap at any moment. A heavy silence smothered the room. The cold was so dense, I could hear it pressing against the walls. I couldn't explain it, but something felt wrong. I stepped closer to the coffin, peering toward the veiled face. A suffocating feeling of being watched crawled over me. I turned around, no one else. Just Randall and me. I felt completely out of place. Then I heard whispering. Not from Randall, but from somewhere within the room. A raspy voice, like someone trying to speak through a sheet of cloth. The whispers grew quieter, then vanished altogether, and there I stood, utterly alone in that freezing room, while ghosts from the past began to stir again. When I stepped outside to catch my breath, I saw her. A little girl, no more than 7, standing at the end of the hallway, staring at me. Long black hair, a pale face, wide eyes that looked hollow, like they had no pupils. I looked away. When I looked back, she was gone. Terror rose in my chest. It was Melanie, the missing girl, the one I had read about in the files. But why here? Why now? Why in front of her mother's coffin? Before I could think, I rushed back inside, only to be blocked by Randall. He pulled me into a small dark room. "You don't understand," he rasped. "Sarah kept part of Melanie's soul in that room. The girl didn't die. She was trapped." He told me that Sarah had once performed a strange ritual in that room when Melanie was little. A ritual she believed would keep her daughter's spirit with her forever. But instead, it had opened a door. A passage to somewhere else. A place where Melanie's soul was stuck. Over time, Sarah became haunted by the ghost of her own daughter. And when she died, what remained was Melanie's haunting. I turned toward the room I had vowed never to enter again. A cold wind swept through the house, carrying a high-pitched shriek, like something ripping through the air. I stood there, gasping for breath. It was already too late. I couldn't leave. I knew that if I walked away now, I wouldn't just be leaving a house behind. I'd be abandoning a soul that had been forgotten. And something even worse was waiting, right behind me. The next day, I returned to that room, but what stopped me in my tracks was the reflection of Melanie in the mirror. Just a pale silhouette, standing still, waiting for me. I was exhausted. Sleepless nights, unending nightmares, and the constant sense that something was standing behind me every time I turned away. The third bedroom in this house seemed to have opened a door that couldn't be closed again. A door into a darkness I could not explain. But what terrified me more was the pull I felt from within that room, as if something inside was inviting me. After returning from Sarah Grace's funeral, I no longer had the courage to keep living in Wilford. And yet, even as I packed my things and prepared to leave, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened inside that house. Melanie's image in the mirror, the pale figure on the bed, the strange sounds from the third bedroom, they all spiraled deeper and deeper into my thoughts. One evening, while I stood at the window, staring outside, I suddenly heard soft footsteps in the hallway. I turned. The door to the third bedroom was wide open. I froze. There was no one else in the house but me. The door couldn't have opened on its own. I had locked it from the outside. And yet there it was, open, waiting, as if something inside was expecting me. My legs refused to move. I wanted to run, to get away from this house, but some strange force pulled me forward. I stepped into the room. It looked nothing like the last time I'd seen it. The air was thick, damp, and suffocating, reeking of mold and something older than rot. The cold still clung to the space like a living thing. The weak light from the old bedside lamp cast a dim glow onto the bed, where the white bedsheet had been replaced with black fabric. So dark, it seemed to swallow the light around it. But the worst part was the shadow sitting on the bed. It was tall, thin, and indistinct, but I could see its hands gripping the bed tightly, like it was waiting. My eyes couldn't look away, even though I knew I shouldn't look. And then I heard the whisper. This time, it wasn't from the room. It was inside my head. A voice soft, sweet, and ice cold. Lisa, you can't leave. I spun around trying to bolt for the door, but it was already locked from the inside. There was no way out. The shadow on the bed began to move. It didn't stand, but it rose. Its shape stretched forward, slithering, inching closer, until I could feel its chill breath against my skin. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just stood there, watching it come closer, as if my very soul was being drawn into its presence. Then it stood upright, and I realized it wasn't human. Its face, if you could call it that, split open into a wide, toothless mouth. It made a sound like bones cracking, but it spoke no words. It only stared. My heart thundered. My limbs froze. It was like being pulled into a void, through the black wells of its non-existent eyes. And then, it stepped off the bed, gliding toward me. The entire room went deathly silent, except for the sound of my breath. Shallow, ragged, that shadow stretched with each step, moving like a person, but like a mist that consumed everything it touched. And in that final moment before it reached me, I felt it. The pressure, the demand. It wanted me to speak to it. It had been waiting for so long. Lisa, the voice echoed again in my head. You are next. Just as I was about to cry out, the lights flickered, the black bedsheet began to fade, and in its place stood Melanie. She had no eyes, but she was staring at me. Her small form stood still, silent, but I could feel her anguish through her tiny hands, clenched tight at her sides. She wasn't free, and I could no longer leave this place either. I stepped forward. A wave of bitter cold crashed over me. The shadow in the corner extended. The room blurred around me. And then, I felt a stabbing pain deep in my chest, like I was being torn apart from the inside out. In that final moment before I collapsed, I heard one last whisper inside my head, as if someone was telling me a story. If you free Melanie, you will pay the price. When I awoke, I was no longer in that room. Everything around me was dark. I could hear the wind howling, and I could feel someone standing beside me. I couldn't run anymore. All I could do was watch and know that the door to that room had closed forever. I didn't know how long I'd been unconscious. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in that horrifying room. Everything had become hazy. I was lying in a different space, still dim, still heavy. But it wasn't the third room. It wasn't the old house. I couldn't remember how I got here. Only that the fear still clung to me like a second skin. There was a strange sensation deep within me, as if part of my soul was still trapped back in that house. flickering between two worlds. I could no longer hear the whispers, no longer feel the presence of the shadow that haunted me, but the coldness. It never left. It followed every step I took. I sat up, trying to steady my breath. The room around me was eerily silent. Not a creak, not a single sound. Only the pounding of my heart filled the air. And then I saw her. A figure standing in the doorway. Soft light from a night lamp cast a pale glow on her face. It was Amanda. She stood still, arms clutching a document bag. "Lisa." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "You can't keep running. The room. It wants you back." I got up and approached her, but when I looked into her eyes, something felt off. The warmth I once knew in her gaze had vanished. Her eyes looked haunted, like someone who no longer truly belonged to themselves. "Please, Amanda, I can't take it anymore. That room, it's not just a room. I saw Melanie. I saw the shadow. And I felt myself being pulled into it, like there was no way out." Amanda said nothing. She knelt slowly and placed the bag on the floor. Inside were strange items. A small mirror, a long rope, and a bundle of old keys. She looked at me again, and I knew she was about to say something important. "Lisa, we have to perform a ritual to end this." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A ritual? To do what? Free Melanie? Or plunge me deeper into a nightmare I'd never escape? Amanda explained that this was the only way to close the door Sarah Grace had once opened, but it wouldn't be easy. The ritual required a sacrifice. A part of myself, either my soul, or at the very least, a piece of my memory. "You have to choose," she said, her voice trembling. "You'll never forget what happened. And if you don't do this, Melanie will never stop following you." Fear swallowed me whole. I wanted to deny everything Amanda said, but her words rang like echoes from another world, calling to me from beyond. This room. It was the one place I couldn't run from anymore. And despite the fear, I felt something else too. A strange pull from within the room itself. It wasn't Melanie. It wasn't the shadow. It was the room. The place I had left behind, but which had never let go of me. When Amanda placed the mirror on the table, I saw my reflection in it. But it wasn't me. The figure in the glass was a shadow, a silhouette I didn't recognize. I wanted to turn away, but I couldn't. "Don't look into the mirror," Amanda warned, urgent and breathless. "It will pull you in. It will take everything." But I couldn't obey. The shadow inside the mirror twitched, as if trying to claw its way out. Before I could comprehend what was happening, the air changed. It thickened, like there was no oxygen left to breathe. Then came the knocking. Not at the front door. From the third room. No more doubts. The shadow from that room was back, and this time it wanted me to face it. I stood. Immediately. No hesitation. Just instinct. I walked toward the third room's door. Each step felt like a stretch of eternity. And when I crossed the threshold, something pulled me in. Hard. The room was freezing, but it wasn't the same room I had fled. Everything was gray. Shadowy figures hissed from the corners like caged animals. This wasn't a bedroom anymore. It was a prison. A place where lost souls wandered endlessly, never finding the exit. Then I saw it. The shadow I had tried so hard to forget. But now, it wasn't just a blur. It was a man, with hollow eyes and a gaze that crushed the space around him. Every step he took was like thunder, as if he were walking through a personal hell. And then I realized the most terrifying thing. That man was Randall Grace. The moment I recognized him, a piercing shriek shattered the silence. And the darkness didn't just surround me, it dragged me in. I couldn't fight it. But then I heard a voice in my head, weak but resolute. Melanie's, help me out. I had no choice now. I had to face the darkness. But the price would be part of my soul, and I would never return to who I was before.